before we begin, a couple quick announcements for anyone who listens to us either on a regular basis or maybe this is the first episode that they've listened to, or maybe they don't listen to us.
All right.
These are for all the fans that don't listen. We do have an Instagram page. It's the Doing Virtue Podcast. If you're not a follower, check us out. I post the episodes on there, a little bit of a description of the guest, and then sometimes I'll repost other people's content, but very rarely. So that's a good follow. We also, this is new, we have a Twitter page, or X.
Snap.
Let's go.
We just post the episodes, and then every once in a while I have a past episode a past guest who will post something, and I'll repost it so that you're made aware that we interviewed them, and you can check that out. We also have an email, and it's contact@doingvirtue.com. If there is a guest that you think would be interesting to have on, you can reach out to us. If there is a part of the show that you didn't like, you can let us know. If there's a part of the show you did
We'll
like,
trash it.
please let us know. Yeah, we're going to delete that email.
I mean,
Just forward it to the guest that they did.
Right, yeah, exactly. Please read this. So anyway, check those out. I do have another announcement. This episode has not been posted yet. It's the next one to be posted, and by the time this one is posted, it'll probably be 2 weeks after it's posted. However, we interviewed someone named Caleb Mitchell from the Catholic Pipe Company, and for the first time in Doing Virtue history, we have a promo code.
Dude.
So if you use promo code capital D, capital V, capital P, OD, which is DV Pod, you can get 15% off on all the Catholic pipes. And he has some sick pipes, let me tell you. Some of them are budget pipes. They're $30, $40. Some of them are multiple hundreds of dollars. Some of them, even if you don't smoke the pipe, you should get to look cool. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like people who display cigar boxes but don't smoke. It's the same thing, but with pipes. He's got dragons. He's got frogs. He's got all kinds of stuff.
lion.
He has a lion. Anyway,
Need I
check
say
it
more?
out. It's awesome.
Here we go.
I'm excited about tonight's guest. Did you see that transition? Wasn't that great? Tonight's guest is Andy Hickman, and he runs a company called Heal, and we're going to hear all about it. But first, we're going to have some bourbon to get things going.
Let's go.
Tonight, we are drinking A. Overholt. It's a straight rye whiskey, and it's a Monongahela mash. Let me see. I sent Brian the tasting notes. Don't know if he has them ready. Probably not.
Come on, Brian.
It's 95 proof, so it's a 47.5 alcohol.
On my phone.
Do you want me to pull it up?
No, I'm just
okay. Now, anyone who listens to the show knows that I'm the person who buys the alcohol, and there are multiple reasons that I buy it. One of the reasons is I've heard of it, and I'm interested, and I want to get it. Sometimes it's because it's on sale. This one was a combination of being on sale, I hadn't seen it before, and I liked the bottle.
Oh.
Sometimes the bottle gets me.
It is a nice bottle.
It's kind of a nice bottle. It's got a wooden cap, which is kind of rare. A lot of times the cap is plastic and it's got a cork, or it's a twist off if it's a really cheap bottle, but it's a nice wooden cap and it's got some little nice lines in it. I haven't had this before. I have had Old Overholt before, and Old Overholt is a fantastic, it's like a $25 rye. You can get it. It's a red twist off cap. It's not super high end, but it's very good if you're looking for a cheap rye. Like, just a lot of times rye, if you get like the $20, $30 version, not that good. This one is good. Makes great Manhattans, great old fashions. Would recommend. This is right next to it. This I think was $37, and then it was on sale for a little bit less. So yeah, doesn't it sound echoey? Maybe it's just me.
Honestly, when it
Maybe
was
I'm talking
pointed
right into
more,
it.
Yeah. It was working a little more.
So anyway, that's what we're drinking tonight.
Yeah, that's true, because when you're like
When
that,
I'm
that's when it does it.
Yeah, but usually it picks up the sound further back. But I
Ah.
don't know. I don't like being this close to it, but that's okay. Maybe I
it's
need
just
to get
pointed
closer.
up a little too much.
Yeah, this is a little different. But
right.
that's okay.
Here we go.
All right, I'm going to pour this, and I think what we're going to do. So the last episode that I did, it was a solo episode, and I read the tasting notes, and we tasted it, and then my guest immediately was like, "Yeah, I taste all those things," and I was like, "James, that is not true. You definitely don't taste all those things."
Because wait, how can I guess on a solo episode?
No, just me. Sorry, I was solo hosting the episode.
James.
Like,
That should have been more clear.
James is his middle name.
Don't
You know what? One of my favorite. This conversation is already derailed. I'm blaming it on you, Andy. One of my favorite Valentine's Day cards is roses are red, violets are blue. I'm schizophrenic, and so am I. Good times. All right. All right, everyone. This is the Doing Virtue podcast.
Catholic podcast.
For virtue is what we do. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for being here, Andy.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get some tasting notes going here.
I think I'm tasting rye.
Okay. He obviously looked at the tasting notes beforehand. It's very peppery, which is pretty typical for a rye. It reminds me a lot of the 1776 bottle. Mm-hmm. I don't think we had it on the show, but you almost get like a lot of black pepper kind of in the back of your throat.
Yeah.
I think you can't really go wrong with vanilla. I feel like most tasting notes, you're like, yeah, I'm getting some vanilla.
It looks like caramel, so there you go.
It's kind of like an apple juice color.
Actually,
I didn't look at the notes. I just sent you the link.
Wait, where did these notes come from? Are they?
They're not official. Well, it's a website. I just don't use one specifically.
Okay. I thought Brian like wrote the notes, and then we're like trying to guess that. What
no,
I
sorry,
wrote.
that was unclear.
No. This is actually from.
No, what I like to do though, we've done it both ways. And
Wait, James got all of them?
Yeah, well, he said that. I read out the tasting notes. We had a sip, and he was like, "Yeah, I taste
all that.
blackberry.
Oh, okay.
I taste leather.
Dude,
I
was
taste."
gonna be like, this is awesome. He just like without seeing it.
No, just nailed it. No. I think he just.
Go, James.
Now, to be fair to James, I don't think he was just saying, "Oh yeah, I got all that." I think he just was like, "Yeah, I agree." Like,
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with the tasting notes.
Yeah.
But I like to taste it and then read the tasting notes and then
more
taste
fun.
it again.
Yes.
Because I think that sometimes you get an initial flavor, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Then you read the tasting note and you're like, oh, that's the flavor, which I think is really cool. Like sometimes you get like ginger or like
clove.
Yeah, or clove, but you can't quite.
I feel like that's the only thing.
You're getting clove right now?
Yeah, like so let me preface this.
Well,
like
before we read it, tell us what you're getting.
Okay, yeah. Well, so my preface is actually going to be a disappointment for that question, then, which is like I don't taste that stuff. Like it's the same thing as okay. There's this artist James Reed, who I think is one of the most interesting dudes ever. He has a couple lectures on YouTube, and his voice is unreal. It's like. Yeah, like surely this guy's joking, but then like he'll be, like hour and a half in. Ponytail, long hair, lectures with this old school style, like extendable pointer thing. He's like, if you see the painting, the artist comes in from the bottom left corner and surges through the. So he gave a couple.
Is his
lectures.
voice like that?
Yes.
Wow.
I'm very serious.
He should do sleep stories.
James
for
Reed.
Hallow.
James Reed. He's
James Reed. Okay.
Amazing. But so he did a couple of talks for the Institute of Catholic Culture.
Oh, sweet.
And so I'd be listening to him. Like I'd like look at this painting and be like, yes, I see this painting. I understand what it is. And then he'd start talking and be like, I didn't get any of that. Like, but he's talking about it and I get it. But
did you disagree with what he said?
No. I was.
So it was all addition. Like, oh, I see that. I agree. Great.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I wouldn't say that I agreed with it either. It's more just like, do you agree or disagree when you hear a new language for the first time? It's like, you don't even, how do you agree or disagree with it? You're just like, what is this?
Right.
So that's my, like, same with wine. Like, I like the idea of being able to be like, this is a thing.
Yeah.
But like,
so that's something that we've talked about. Like when we do the tasting is like, I think it's okay, which I appreciate the honesty. I think it's okay to say, I'm not getting any of these flavors, or I don't really know what I taste it. It tastes like whiskey.
Yeah.
But I'm not getting anything. The cool thing is if you try it enough and you try to really develop the palate, you will get some flavors. Like I don't taste this and say, okay, I'm getting 16 different flavors and it's predominantly this, but I'll be like, yeah, I get these 2 or 3 things. And then if they're in the tasting notes, then I feel really justified. Like, okay, now I know when I'm tasting it, I'm really getting like this buttery caramel. Okay, I know how to taste that.
Yeah.
And like anytime I taste something that's similar to that,
that's what it is.
Yeah, like I'm actually able to identify this in a kind of a neat way and then the cool thing is if you do it enough, or if you have a good enough memory, which I really don't, but sometimes I can pull this from out back there somewhere where I'm like, this tastes like this.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly what the tasting notes were, but like my mind is jumping from one to the other. And I think this happens a lot with Irish whiskeys because they're so sweet, is you're like, yeah, I'm getting like brown sugar, caramel, vanilla, cinnamon, something like that, and you're like, this tastes exactly like this other one. And then you look them up and you realize they're almost the same like dollar amount, very similar tasting notes. And then you're like, oh, they're totally different companies, but the profiles are very similar, and I'm actually nailing the profile. Like, I got it. I can lock that in. And if you can just do that with a couple, then you're good.
You got your snowball.
Then you're good.
Well, I do like the format of like not like having the baseline, the notes, guessing, and then seeing. Because that creates like the game.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's good to be able to put it in a category. Like, I think if I just tasted this without knowing that it was a rye, I think it's only aged 4 years. It's a mash, so it's slightly different than just like a single malt, right? Or just a mixed rye. Having those things, I think, helps, because as soon as I know that it's a rye, I'm going to know primarily or predominantly it's going to be a little bit spicier. It's not going to be as smooth. It's probably not going to be as tasty on the initial taste as bourbon or an Irish whiskey would. Some of them are lighter, but a lot of times a rye is kind of jarring. It's like, oh, that's kind of a lot. Like, makes you shiver a little bit depending on how strong it is. So this one's not that bad.
I will say, I do. It would be great for me to agree that I can, after a certain amount of whiskeys, I could be like, yeah, I totally get that thing. And it hasn't really happened.
So this is from the Jim Beam distillery. And it's at 80% rye grain and 20% soft malted barley. And yeah, it's aged 4 years in new charred oak. Interesting. The only tasting notes on this, it says robust notes of warm spice. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm getting that. All right, let's hear these tasting notes. I want
to. All right. I'll go through the 4 categories.
Okay.
So color, we didn't really talk. Well, we kind of did.
I said apple juice.
This is clover honey.
Oh.
Okay. I don't know what that is.
Neither do I. But
sounds good.
We'll move
you
on.
said cloves, though.
Yeah, you did.
Well,
but this is the color. So that doesn't really count.
No, I didn't say.
No, you said cloves.
You review the recording.
All right. Well,
Brian
we'll
said
stop
it
it now.
We need to get an instant replay.
Well, okay. Aroma. We'll get into aroma. Caramel.
Okay.
Subtle layers of sandalwood and caraway.
Okay.
Not really sure what that smells like, but I guess it smells like that. And then taste. Here we go. Brown butter.
Okay.
Honeysuckle.
No.
Seasoned oak.
Well, it's aged in oak. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of an obvious
And then
one.
the last thing, the kicker, is clove.
Okay. Wow.
And then the finish is pleasant, lingering notes of warm, rich baking spice. Not sure what.
I thought you were going to say baking soda.
Okay, whenever I think of baking spice, I'm like, are you talking about baking soda?
No,
Are
probably
you,
like allspice or like cinnamon, allspice. Like,
yeah,
I would like things you would maybe use in like muffins.
Rye. Yeah, with rye, I could see that. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I was trying. I unfortunately looked at it before I tried it, so I was trying to find the brown butter, but I don't know. I feel like brown butter is usually something that I find in other things.
Yeah.
So like when I brown butter to cook eggs or brown butter to cook pancakes, like
okay.
Oh yeah, brown butter in
It's an
pancakes tastes like
association,
this,
yeah.
but I don't know what brown butter regularly
So
tastes like.
on the last episode that I did with James, we were talking about how whiskey is, and other things, but I think more specifically whiskey, is the tasting notes are really interesting. Maybe just alcohol in general, but I think it's, if you drink whiskey primarily, it's predominantly whiskey. That the interesting thing about it is that you're saying that there's a taste in there that normally you would only smell. And he gave the example of wood, right? So like sandalwood, I think, was one of the tasting notes. You wouldn't taste wood, but you know what fresh wood, like fresh cut wood, smells like, or maybe bark. And if you're getting some of that, you probably are, because it's aged in oak barrels.
Right.
But you're getting the taste of wood, but your only association with it is a smell of wood. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because if you smell it and you're not getting wood, but you taste it. So he said, and to that point, he said there was this Instagram video that he saw, and it was someone making, it sounds really dumb, but I found it later, and I now I kind of want to try it. Someone was making wood ice cream, because they're like, well, wood is a good smell, and you wouldn't eat wood because you can't eat wood. But
but
it does
looking
get,
at CNC's Instagram page.
no. But they should do that, though. I should go pitch them. Peanut butter and wood. But apparently, now I don't know if they're joking and they're just like trolling people, but apparently, like if you soak it in like milk or something, there is a taste that you can get out of it, and then you make that into ice cream. So when you're tasting it, it tastes like what wood smells like, but it's in cream. Like you're not eating chunks of wood. It's just the flavor that comes out, like some of the sap, some of the, I don't know what exactly.
Interesting.
But that totally revolutionized the way that I thought about
Ice cream.
smells, but in taste.
So the
Like
next
how
time
that-
we have a sundae, we're gonna have a piece of oak in it.
Dude, no, I don't think it works like that.
no, I don't think
anyway, yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's
I thought
really-
those tasting notes were pretty accurate.
Yeah,
I
that's
didn't
really
disagree.
interesting.
I don't know what the sandalwood was, but
Right. It's such a weird thing to be tasting something that you regularly only smell. Mm-hmm. I'll have to
well,
try
and
that this
another
next
interesting
time.
thing about it too is that smell. I don't know what the word is, but I believe smell more than everything except I think vision affects your memory the most. So like
vision is nuts.
Vision and like you could have remember like seeing things when you were really tiny and you could barely talk, but you'll remember seeing it.
Right.
And if you see it again, or you were scared by a thing and then you see it again, it'll trigger something. But smell, like if you went into your parents' house and it smells the same as when you did when you were a kid, it's like boom.
Yeah.
Like
Or like your grandparents'
you could tell.
house.
Yeah, and you can tell instantly because that smell is it imprints something in your mind more so than almost any other sense, which I thought was really interesting.
Interesting. I feel like people talk about. Sorry, last thing. I feel like people talk about with memory, like food, because they're like, "Oh, I remember eating this when I was younger, or when I was sick, or whatever." So maybe, I mean, I guess maybe
You
if they're
get so many senses with food, though.
yeah, okay, yeah, maybe maybe
And
they're
actually, I think
they're tasting the
I
smell.
think
maybe.
smell. No, I was
Yeah.
going to say I think smell is a big part of that because when people got COVID, or if you get some sickness like that
can
and you
you
don't
say
have
that on
smell, yeah, totally.
the mid monster.
I was gonna make a vaccination joke, but it's not worth it. But no, but like that, like
expensive.
when I lost my sense of smell, wasn't COVID. I just had backaches and no, but I remember like food had no flavor. I'm sure you've both been sick where like you don't have
Never.
the sense of smell, or you plug your nose, but like food has no flavor, and it's odd because you're like, well, I should be able to taste this,
Right.
but I can't,
Yeah.
or like food tastes different,
Right.
So it is connected somehow.
Yeah, and
pretty
that,
interesting.
honestly, with COVID, that was definitely that actually never happened to me, but so many people were like, "I'm okay," but not being able to taste the food is like terrible.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, 100%. This one last thing. This bottle makes me think of a medicine bottle.
Agreed.
Does it make you think of a medicine bottle?
Yeah, a pretty big medicine bottle, but yeah.
It is pretty big. Yeah.
Have you guys ever gone to, I think it's called Water Street Kitchen in Winchester?
No,
Yes.
I'm not.
Basically the only reason I go to Winchester or Costco. Sorry, Winchester beer.
That's some fighting words there. Wait, have you been to Willie Sutton's?
No, I have not.
Oh, it's a great bar. It's an old bank that they turned into a bar.
Oh, yeah.
I've actually only had 2 drinks there. I don't know if the drinks are like anything to write home about, but they have I think
That's
one
for
of
your birthday,
one
right?
of the one of the vaults is a bathroom, and then the other old vault, I think they have supplies, and then you sit out there and they've got the big round kind of elongated windows, like almost like you'd see stained glass in, but they're clear, and they've got like a circle at the top, big open windows.
yeah, yeah.
And then everything is like bar themed. So all the drinks are named after like bank robbers. There's like bank robber black and white mug shots hanging up. Yeah. Anyway,
Sorry, what was?
I don't know why I
Water
went
Street
off on
Kitchen. It's,
No, Winchester.
In the inside, it used to be like an old school medicine place. So they have these crazy cabinets like on the side, but now it's just like stocked with like craft beer and stuff. But
what are those called?
It's really
like
cool.
no, there's a name for it because for a while it was a fad. Like the big wooden, super heavy medicine cabinets, and there's 1,000 drawers. Like starts with an A. Apothecary or
apothecary.
Apothecary. That's how you, like table or shelf, which I think for a while was like a big Pottery Barn thing. Like people wanted it, even though it was like totally useless because you'd never use all those drawers. But it was like, oh, this used to be a big like medicine cabinet. Anyway, Andy, tell us about yourself. Where are you from? And
From Arlington, Virginia.
okay, cool.
Yeah. So Northern Virginia.
Born and raised in Northern Virginia.
Born and raised.
And how'd you end up here?
So, my wife and I met at William and Mary. We got married. We were living in Centerville. I was teaching at St. Veronica's. She was teaching down at Angelus Academy.
Okay.
And we were living in Bentry Apartments in Centerville. And so we were just like, whatever, regular apartment kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So we found out that she was pregnant, and her due date happened to be the same day as like our lease renewal thing. Okay. So that just like made us start thinking like, I don't know, do we want to be here? We didn't know anything at the time. So we thought, well, we'll just get something small and stay in Northern Virginia.
Right.
Like a small condo or something. Then we started like actually looking at the prices. We're like, oh gosh. So most of our families in that area, we wanted to stay close to our family. So that left only a couple options. And, we obviously knew about the community out here. I was looking at a couple other things. And then also I started directing the Institute of Catholic Culture, and their home base is out here. So it just kind of happened. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was within family distance and still in Virginia. We like the Four Seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said you taught at St. Veronica's. What were you teaching there?
Middle school. Well, okay. So what I was promised is different than what I taught. But what I taught, I actually liked more. So just for the record. But,
so it worked out.
I'm a big fan of Father Hathaway. So he hired me, and he promised me that I'd be able to be the PE teacher. Which to me at the time was like, I'd made it, Right. that's basically like everything. So I was the PE teacher for half of the year. My first year there was a new principal after like 10 years of the same principal or whatever. And so basically just everything was chaotic. I ended up getting pulled into teaching math, which is very different from PE, just in case you were wondering. And not my strong suit by any means. I did that, and they're like, what? And then all of a sudden I was teaching religion. It's a longer story than that, but I'll leave it out of that. But that's where I feel at home. And so I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade religion for about 3 years. Okay. And from there, directed the Institute of Catholic Culture for about 3 years, maybe 3.5. And then in that, started having this idea of what I'm doing now, and I can get into that, but
sure.
But yeah, that's how I got here.
Okay. So was Father Hathaway the priest at St. Veronica's before he came here, or was that after? Because I know he was the pastor. He was the pastor here. Correct. Right after that, I think, then.
No, it was, he came to St. Veronica after he was here. So he was here, and then he came to St. Veronica. Okay. Yeah, so I actually have this fun memory of like walking the kids through. So St. Veronica's is structured kind of interesting. It's like a U. And then the center of that is the church. So you regularly would be walking through the church throughout the day, like if you're going from one wing to the other wing. It's very cool. But so one time I was in there, and there's just like really nice people, just like very smiley, and they're like changing, like sanding down the wood or whatever. And I remember just saying hello and being like, man, these are like really great people. And then moved on with my life. But it was the Heislers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so
Nice.
So Father Hathaway had brought them out because he already knew them from being out here.
Sure.
And they refinished the floor of the sanctuary and stuff. But
Okay. Nice.
Very cool.
Did he do your house?
Yeah, he did.
Nice.
Yeah.
I thought so. He also did my parents' house. So
Yeah. Here we go.
back in the day.
Yeah. Right.
Very cool. So you were teaching math, then you started teaching religion.
Yep.
What? You were teaching multiple different grades. So was it multiple different areas of religion then?
We would do.
What's the curriculum for
so
that?
the actual, if you look at the actual curriculum requirements within the Arlington Diocese for religion for middle school, it's quite bare bones. It's essentially like the table of contents of the catechism.
Okay.
But it doesn't go into much detail about what resources you need to use. There's actually much more flexibility than you think. Most people just plug in the Faith and Life series, right?
Okay. Sure.
The tragedy of that is that usually that workbook does all the heavy lifting, and so the children don't actually develop their own muscles with the stuff. But so I was given a lot of freedom to build the curriculum ground up as long as I was following the guidelines for the diocese. So 6th grade, they get their own Bible, and we're working through the Old Testament. And then 7th grade, they would make their own illuminated manuscript. We would take the Gospel of Matthew, and they would hand copy it throughout the year. And then we would use that as they basically would make their own commentary, like scriptural commentary with the Gospel of Matthew. And then we had these main events. We used a lot of, I always mix up Bergsma and Bergsman, but you were just talking about him earlier.
John Bergsma.
Father
Yeah.
John Bergsma, yeah.
Well,
Not
Father John. I was talking
I'm sorry,
about
not Father John. No.
John
I didn't
Bergsma.
mean Father. Sorry,
Steubenville.
Dr. John
Correct.
Bergsma.
Yes,
Teaches at Steubenville.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so
St. Paul
Bible
said.
Basics is like the greatest book ever because it's just
Bible Basics.
yeah,
that's
Bible
something
Basics
I've
for
had.
Catholics.
I don't think I've.
Oh, dude,
I know
It's just one of
I know
his.
the Bergsman Petrie book that
Yeah,
they
the
did
Old Testament
together,
book.
which Old Testament.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
Bible Basics.
Bible
was that?
Basics for Catholics is like the greatest intro to the Bible ever, and it looks. He's such a fantastic teacher because he doesn't mind like. He keeps the content rich, but he knows how to dial or bring the tone down so that it's easy to digest, but it's not watered down. So this book is hilarious. It's like stick figures and like random, and like he's making these hilarious jokes. It's just as rich as like your standard like Scott Hahn, A Father Keeps His Promises, or Tim Gray's what in the world was the latest one? Something about like Path to God or something.
Brian, this is why you need to get the laptop. If you're going to be a producer, I need you to look this stuff up.
All I know is that the author is.
You just know the author.
Bible basics. But anyway, so
Okay,
they got this foundation
basics.
in the Old Testament so that they could actually recognize what's happening when the New Testament comes. And then 8th grade, we would their main source text was the Catechism. So the goal was, by the time they graduate, they are comfortable. They know how to use and navigate both the Bible and the Catechism. For 8th grade, they would pick different questions, and then basically I break them into small groups, and they would recreate kind of like how that the same style that you see in the Summa, where you take a question, then you digest it, and you present counter things. And so they would have different sections in the Catechism, and then do a presentation that basically was like an oral version of the Summa style.
Okay.
So that they're practicing debate and they're practicing looking things up in the glossary.
And this is 7th grade.
That's 8th grade.
Oh, this is 8th grade. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, with the Catechism.
Okay. Nice. That sounds
Dang.
good.
So did you read the book by Dr. Bergsma before you did all that, or was it, and that was kind of why you wanted to do that, or why did you choose that, or why did you choose that for each of the grades?
Why did I choose that for each? I'll give an answer, but like it's gonna be like Aspergery or like too literalistic or something, and then you adjust it. Okay. So like I wanted them to learn to the best of their ability. Like I don't know. That's just how I think, right?
Sure.
So I'm like they don't like. There's so much in Scripture, and it's not. How are they going to get excited about living the faith if they don't know it? And how are they going to come to know it unless they become familiar with it? Right. So it's like, just get their hands messy in the thing. So I guess here's a better answer. I wanted them to work with the primary text. Right. That's the answer. Okay. And actually mark it up and get used to making it messy and all that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that seems like
I'm picking up on some themes that we'll probably get to later.
That was definitely not. I don't know. Did you hear of that happening elsewhere?
No, it's totally weird and unusual.
I mean, that's awesome because
Yeah.
that's not something like we got the Old Testament and New Testament at Christendom, but like, I mean, I didn't really like all the texts that I grew up with, or like the textbooks that I grew up with were all just like, this is it, this is what happened, this is all, and then it was very much like, I mean, lack of a better term, like dumbed down to where you were missing a lot of it and you weren't using the text. You'd have quotes here and there, but that, I mean, I don't know, that's a really cool way to do it.
Did you find that you would get bogged down too much?
No, this was like the only reason why I'm like still not doing that. Well, is because God wants me to do something else, and things played out. Right. Like, but no. We didn't get bogged down. Like these kids fell in love with the faith. Like, and every day was not the first 2 years. Like anyone who's a teacher, like that first it's all a blur. But then you hit your stride, year 3, year 4. And no, these kids loved it. We would do a bunch of different games. And one of my favorite memories is there was a student, Penelope, I'll leave the last name out, but she was an exchange student from China. And so I came in when she was in 8th grade, I believe. But she gave me this letter towards the end of the year that was like, gosh, it was just like very beautiful. Where she was like, I literally didn't think God exists or that he cared about me or anything. Like now I like know that he actually loves me. Right. And she went on and actually entered into the church in high school, and her sponsor gave her her own Bible. She was already further past, like when I inherited the religion teacher job, so she didn't get a Bible when she was at St. Veronica's. But the interesting thing is there was some sort of weird dynamic about it, such that I was like, oh, why is this happening? But they had to like keep the Bible safe or something. There was some point in which she had to go back to her family for a little bit in China. And so like, she was like, keep it here, because if I go over there, it's going to get taken from me. So it's just like, anyway, I give that example because, it's like especially by middle school, like you're awake, like, and you're hungry and you want real stuff. You don't want the cheesy stuff,
Right.
Right. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a pretty interesting line to walk of, like, you don't want to overstimulate them. You don't want to throw so much at them that they just like stop caring or feel like they're drowning in work or in study. But I think the easiest way to lose students is to be like, all right, well, you're not old enough to learn about this. And so let's just kind of do the, like, I think kids, especially maybe even middle school more than high school, I think can really smell out this is fake. Like, this teacher doesn't know what he's talking about. They're boiling it down, and you need to be the teacher to come in and say, this is what we're doing. I know it's going to be hard, but you can rise to the challenge, and you can get this done. And I think that a lot of teachers probably don't do that, unfortunately. It sounds like you did. That's cool. Do you see good results with that? Like, I guess because you probably had those kids the following year, right? You had the 6th graders that were in 7th grade. Could you see that progression of, wow, they started it in 6th grade, and by 8th grade, like, they're a totally different person, at least in this category. Like, the development is exponential.
Yeah, it was really fun to see that. Now, in one sense, that you still don't like, so you learn best when you have some sort of contrast, like, because we think analogically. So one sense, it's like, until they left and I would hear from their high school teachers, like, their high school teachers would ask, like, what school did you come from? Because, like, you're like 3 years above what a freshman should be, right? Then I could have that contrast, because otherwise they're all just within me and I'm just seeing them, so I don't have any.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine it's kind of similar. Like, you have a couple kids, right? Probably similar to you saying, yeah, I think my kids are doing this, or they're smart, or they're interested in whatever, but it doesn't really hit you until another parent says, hey, your kid is like really good at this, or like really smart, and then you're like, oh, okay, other people are seeing this too. It's not just me praising my child or praising my own parenthood. Like, other people are recognizing this.
Yeah,
100%. Totally. So from there, you went to Institute of Catholic Culture. How did you land that job, or what played down with that? Yeah,
so it's a little bit of a blur. Like, I know that I was already involved, like, plugged in with the Institute of Catholic Culture, which, like, still today is, like, I don't know, like, the Catholic world's best kept secret. Like, it literally is doing
100%.
Amazing work. Somehow I got plugged into them even in college. So, it was Bible basics for sure, but also I was regularly listening to their Bible studies, Old Testament, New Testament. That really helped me a lot in terms of teaching. And then, you know what it was? It was one of the, I think it was the 7th graders for prayer at the beginning of class, they would chant one of the Psalms for the day. And I used some instruction from Professor David Clayton, did a couple different talks at ICC. And one of them was like how to teach how to sing in the Psalms. Like this doesn't have to be like a weird monastic thing. Like we should all be familiar with singing the Psalms, right? So they would regularly do that. And then as a way to say thank you to Professor Clayton and Father Ezekias, I sent them a little video of the students doing that. And my intention was simply to thank them. It really touched Father Ezekias. And so him and I struck up a relationship, and then we would talk every once in a while. And one of the things I saw was, look, even if you like are running a great class, like there would still be students that I saw two different sides of the spectrum. You could have one student who you could just kind of tell, like, coming from just like a great family, right? And okay, they were getting engaged with the material in the class, but the thing that was more impressive is like they could be in a class that was a little bit more troublesome, and they still were just always steady. Whereas you could have the other, like you could have someone who's like a little bit more chaotic or whatever, and even if you nailed the lesson every single day, like the home is such a larger influence than the classroom, right? And so for ICC's mission, in terms of prioritizing the primary educator, which is the parents, that really spoke to me, because I saw, look, anything that I'm seeing in the child, that's coming downstream from the parents. So why not help out in this mission that's focusing on equipping parents with that kind of education? So that really spoke to me. And so I hopped on board there.
What was your role specifically with ICC?
I think it was like,
because I know you weren't the only person that worked there, right? So like you,
but for a while.
Oh, were you? Were you? Because I know like Peter Tapsack. I probably know 5 or 6 other people that have worked there, either at different times or together.
Right.
I helped with a couple of their mailings, I think. Like a few times a year, they'd have mailings, and they'd be like, all right, tomorrow we need to get 15,000 things in the mail. And we're like, oh, okay.
Right. It's a team effort. I was the associate director, was the title.
Okay. So did you take care of like filming the recordings, or were you just putting together the like scheduling, getting the speaker,
so
inviting people?
I would work with Father Ezekias to design the curriculum, and then I would MC the events and connect with the speakers, line them up, and then kind of host them when it's actually go time.
Okay. And when was this? What period did you work for them?
This would have been let me think about that. I think it would have been, well, I know I did that for around 3 years, and I know I started my own thing 2020. So it would have been 2017 and 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a mutual friend of ours, Nick Scanlon, worked there, but I think he started in like 2020 or 2021.
Okay.
I don't even think he was full time, but he would help with the lecture. I think the only time he went was during the lecture, and he would go and help set up the camera, put out snacks. I don't even know. I never actually went to one of the lectures, but he was kind of like on Mondays or whenever the lectures are, he's like, I gotta go do this thing for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Which was always weird at school, because you're like, it's a Monday night. You need to study, you have class tomorrow, but he would go and help out. So, I need to dig into their content more. There's a few, like Professor Madden, who teaches at Christendom. He has a couple different courses there, and I had 3 different classes with him. Yeah, he's great. We need to get him on the show, but he's hard to get because he lives so far away and works every day for the where does he work?
He's brilliant.
Department of Justice. Yeah, he runs a big team at the Department of Justice. But so I started listening to some of his lectures, and then I went back and listened to some of Dr. Brennan McGuire's lectures. Christendom has kind of an archive, but those are all available. Yeah. So it's kind of cool to, he's since then deceased, a couple years ago, but just to hear his voice, he was, I think the one I was listening to was on the French Revolution, and just to hear him go off on that, I was like, oh, this is great. Like, kind of a blast from the past.
He is one of the most manly voices I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It's like, dude.
I think someone described him as it's like someone who's constantly yelling, but he just talks. It's
with
like
the tone of like surfer bro though. That was
like,
we were just like
we always the catchphrase we would always do is and then the Romans. It was always like just so like bold and just like
passionate.
Just kind of like brutal.
You could just hear in his voice that he threw the chalk.
Threw chalk at someone. Multiple times that happened to me. Okay, so Institute of Catholic Culture, you were there for 3 years.
Yeah.
Were you involved with like expanding the program, growing the program, or was it like this is kind of the regiment and there's just tasks that need to be done?
Yeah, so when I got brought on, it was a big transition. It was Father Hezekiah was called to serve at a parish in California.
Right.
So he was no longer here on the ground. And then also they were launching a much more focused effort online. So basically I was helping streamline that effort, getting courses off the ground. And then what I found was it's not like my love language, but like I know how to do it well, which is just like designing systems, Okay. So a big part of what I did was basically organize the operations of the back end for it. I was doing a lot of the public speaking side of it, like emceeing the stuff. But I would say the biggest contribution I made there was making a much more systematic foundation, right? So that's part of like what started to like direct my attention into what I do now, though I would say it's a very different approach now. But yeah, I mean, ICC's always been like just they're fighters. Like, and Chris Check would always say this. Like he would like come, like he's the president of Catholic Answers, and he would come to an ICC event, and he would be like, ICC's team is like 10 times smaller than ours, and they do 10 times more. Like, and you should give your money to ICC. Like he would just say this. Like Chris Check he's the man. He's the man.
Do you have his phone number? I hate when people tell me they have famous people's phone numbers. I went to Rogan's Comedy Club one time, and the person sitting next to me said that they were texting him, and I was like, I really want to get his number. I've never wanted someone's number more. I don't know what I would do with it.
Prove it.
Yeah, I'm FaceTiming him right now.
Right. He's standing up there.
Pull up the contact details. Yeah. Anyway, so so it was very much startup vibe for sure. Right. So and then organizing a team, and it was like a heavy volume of tasks to organize. And so then I started being like, okay, like organizing work. And then my background was in teaching, right? So at first I thought I was going to write software because I saw that the biggest gap was the patterns of thought in the person was actually creating the thing that was disorganization. And I thought, well, software can sometimes serve as a guardrails for how you think, which can be used for ill purposes and also good purposes. So I was going down that road, and actually had gone into a coding boot camp and all this stuff. And then it just kind of hit me as like, this is not my skill set. Like at the end of the day, even if I build the perfect app, which is not the solution, which I've come to realize, but even if I did that, I'd still have to convince somebody like why to change what they're using. It still would ultimately come to a teaching or an educational thing. That was already my skill set. So then I thought, well, just start this and see where it goes, and leverage the thing that I already know how to do, which is teach.
Right. And that was when you started the is it Art of Workflow or something? Okay. Yeah. Because I think the first time I heard about you, or maybe I bumped into you somewhere, that was a company, or the thing you were working on was that. So what is that, and why did you start it?
Yeah. So Art of Workflow, that was our original name. Our LLC is still Art of Workflow LLC. So our roots are still there. Why did I start it? Well, I was seeing what organization can do when it starts, especially within a team dynamic, at ICC. But I also was, I was pursuing a master's in theology at the time, and I was in a class with Professor Arias, who is
Joseph Arias.
He is hilarious.
Yeah.
Great guy. Hilarious. Yeah. Sorry.
How do you mute your mic?
right there.
Good to know.
But it was, so we were in this class, more theology, and then he made this, it was like a 5-minute part of that class where he mentioned how Aquinas distinguishes further sub-acts for both the intellect and the will. And that grabbed my attention. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I always just thought, like, you just hear, like, what makes a human different than the other animals? Like, we have an intellect and a will. I've never heard anything more beyond that. So I started looking into that, and I was already very much a student of David Allen's Getting Things Done methodology. And the thing that I liked about David Allen's is that it was principle-based. So he had some understanding of, like, hey, there's like a form for this. There's like there's something that is universal about managing projects, which seems like a side thing for me to get excited about. But the thing that excited me about that is, like, there's so much out there that doesn't want to make a universal claim. Like, they'll couch it in a million different ways. But he was like, I don't care if you're an astronaut or a painter or a stay-at-home mom or whatever, like, you're operating under these fixed things. But he never really stated what those fixed things were. And I thought, well, like we have, like, the richest understanding of human nature. Like, I'm sure there's something in there that lines up and can explain modern project management. So I started looking into Aquinas's, what he calls psychological analysis of voluntary action. So that is basically, like, what happens behind the scenes when a human chooses to do something. And it ends up, what we talk about as intellect and will, he would talk about as 12 different acts. And it looks like, if you graphically map it, it looks like a woven, I don't know, like a friendship bracelet kind of thing, or like, or like GIMP.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's like you first, and then alternates. It's going to be an act of the intellect first, and then that basically triggers an act of the will, which then moves to an act of the intellect and then act of the will. Mm-hmm. And so what I found fascinating about this, like, you could point out reasons why people get stuck. And you could point that out at a very specific layer in the sequence. So anyway, that got me excited. It was like, there's a whole art to this. There's a whole art to workflow. And so, like, that's, like, where it came in. It's like, and at the time, what I was seeing is, like, look, you've got secular, like, business tycoon people that are, like, punching the world and, like, doing big things. And, like, so they know how to get things done, but they don't actually know what the human person is, or, like, why get anything done in the first place. And then on the other side, you had, like, and I'm painting in broad strokes, I understand this, but when you're looking at things from a high level, on the other side, you have, like, the average pious Catholic who's, like, either afraid or, like, ashamed, or, like, thinks it maybe is wrong to do something big. Mm-hmm. And they think work is some sort of, like, hitting a pause button on their spirituality. And it's like, what, but they have all the information. They have, like, the form, right? So, like, why not do something? So initially it was just an attempt to try to bring these two worlds together. And then it started to evolve into what Heal is now, and we can get into that. But I don't know if you have other questions and stuff.
You first.
I have a question. Have you heard? It's a newer book, but I think it's been something that he's been working on for a while. His name's Dr. Abella at the Catholic University of America. He just wrote Super Habits. Mm-hmm. It sounds very similar to that. Obviously, I mean, it literally sounds like it's St. Thomas, but then distilled into the workplace.
Yeah, it's weird how all this stuff syncs up. Yeah, I mean, I had two people tell me about this just today.
Okay.
So yes, it is. So then there's this conversation of like why am I still not art of workflow? Because habits are important, but ultimately, like, and this is not to speak poorly against that book. I'm sure that it's very good.
Yeah.
What tends to happen though is when someone feels disorganized, they're often given a lot of technical, heady, external tool centric advice.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, like, take that book, for example, or take like what I just said, like I'm doing this nerdy thing about the intellect and the will. And right. The thing is, none of that matters if the person hearing it, is also like, what kind of vision of themselves do they have? What kind of vision of, their life do they have? Maybe here's one way to say it. Like, all that technical stuff, it's important, but it speaks to the head. And the head's only going to do stuff or order stuff if the heart is in motion. And so it's more fundamental to speak and animate the heart first. And then that can get shaped and governed with intellectual stuff. But yeah, often I find... I think this is my interpretation of it, which is like, you know, often someone makes some big, I don't know, movement or step forward in this like whole conversation of seeking truth. And if they break new ground, that it initially has this ripple effect that just kind of like carries out for a while, like even if not all of it was true, but it just kind of like gets picked up and then gets echoed. And one of those things that I often think about is one of the main points in Nicomachean Ethics. So, and I think that there's a fundamental error in that book that leads to things like this, where we like over intellectualize something, or we speak to the intellect first rather than to the heart. So in Nicomachean Ethics, he's making this case of like, how do we know what is like a happy life? Like, what's a happy life for, or the good life for a human? And but to set the ground rules for that like conversation, he first says like, what's unique about a human person? So, because we're not talking about the happiness or the good life for a plant or a squirrel, we're talking about the happiness or good life for a human. So it makes sense at first. But the problem is he builds his vision of happiness or good life only on what is exclusively true for humans. And so then you basically are only talking to the intellect and the will. You're not like the vegetative powers that we share with animals or the emotions, for example. I find that the average person who like is informed, they informed their vision of the good life, or it's been informed like through layers of this. If it's only coming from Aristotle, there's a lot of true elements in it, and they tend to operate in this like disconnected way where it's more I mean, honestly, I would say it tends to move towards Gnosticism. They wouldn't say like I'm a Gnostic, but like the way they move and act is in a very Gnostic way, as in it gives prime place and ultimately then kind of exclusive place to the mind, which
And I think that people can probably relate to that. Like, I'm sure everyone knows someone who you would say, oh, they're brilliant, but like I don't really like hanging out with them, right? Like they're smart, they know what they're talking about, they can get up and lecture, they can write a book in their sleep, but like they don't seem real. And it's not that they like, maybe not through any fault of their own, but they just aren't the kind of person that you can walk up to and just talk to. And I think that it's kind of a vice in some sense, but like there are people who are very smart, super intellectual, very, they're multiple IQ points higher than you, but like they just can't hold a conversation. And that's tough because you're like, well, I recognize that you're smarter than me and that I may never be there mentally, but I also can talk to normal people and you're just awkward. I feel like in the same way, like I bet Aristotle or Socrates or people like that were probably very similar, where they're talking about all these kind of lofty things that you can maybe sort of, after reading it and talking about it, sort of understand what they're saying. But like, I wonder if in person, if maybe they were like kind of awkward to talk to, which is not a bad thing.
Sure.
Like that, you know, some people just are more intellectual. Other people very easy to talk to, but like aren't intellectual at all. And so there's a balance there, obviously. But yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's really pointing toward the idea of integration. Is that kind of like integrating, like the like we can have all these intellectual thoughts, but if they're not applied to like our real,
Like the
our real lives.
idea and application.
Right. Yeah, that application part is like where, like idea to application part is the thing that it's either severed or just can get lost and it's really hard to find. So is that sort of what like you're kind of getting at? Like it's that bridge kind of thing.
Well, yes. What's going on inside me is like there's like 10 things in what you just said. Like it's like a very rich question.
Yeah.
And there's like so many layers to that. It's like the short answer is yes. There's all these other like side questions of like, yeah, I don't know who that is.
Someone's talking really loudly. I don't think they're in the building. Okay, should be good. Someone busts in.
There's yes, it is ultimately comes to integration, but also like what kind of thing is being integrated. Is a layer, like how you integrate it, but here's something to get us enough, like whatever. Integrate itself is like a really interesting word. Like when you think of something being integrated, like how do you conceive of that? What's like the image in your mind of something being integrated?
I mean, I guess recently I'd been thinking about just like the Christian life. So actually trying to like the principles of the Christian life, actually have them integrated into life. So as in like
I'm so glad you answered this, not me.
Sorry. Well,
I was going to say like a cocktail where like all the ingredients are good, but you put them all together and it's better. No, keep going with what you were saying. That sounds way better.
No, this is just something I've been thinking about recently.
Yeah.
So just like having the principles. So like the teachings of Christ,
right.
Having the principles and then being applied to like the 7 corporal works of mercy. So like actually doing the thing. So like having the idea and then being able to distill it to action.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, now contrast that. Like what's example of something being disintegrated then?
Well, when that doesn't happen, so if it, I mean, I guess
Either
in this same,
like not having the knowledge or having the knowledge but
and then
not applying
doing anything.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So like here's an interesting thing about that word. Like so integrate. It's got 2 parts in, so like which means non. Think like invisible. Something is not visible. Okay? In. And then that other part of integrate is coming from the Latin. I believe it's tegre. I might mess that up. Latin nerds, I don't know. But I know that it means to touch. So something that is integrated literally means it's untouched. So tell me why you're going,
Well, that would seem like a very different
It seems like
thing.
a contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Elaborate more, because this is like the whole thing.
Okay. Well, I mean, to not touch, I mean, because I mean, what I was saying was being integrated was the thought coming to action. So the thought becoming something that you can touch.
Right. This is what's so interesting about it, right?
Yeah.
So the reason why this is important is, well, it is those things, but the whole point here is that things start, their foundational starting point is one in which they're already whole. So when we say something is integrated, it's going back to the form before it was disordered. Before it was disintegrated.
So you're not taking this thing and then changing it. It's you actually conforming to the thing that's there.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
Which I guess might be harder to explain outside of Christianity, but I think in Christianity it's kind of easy to think about because it's like you're not integrating God into your life, you're conforming your life to accept what's already there. Like God is already there and whole and perfect. You're conforming to him. You're not trying to manipulate him or like leverage him into your life. It's just no, he's there and you just need to like accept that.
So but wouldn't that I don't know, I guess I'm that makes sense. However, it sounds like that would be something that you would have to come to intellectually first. Like you'd have, like, because I mean, it honestly reminds me of like Plato and the forms. Like there's these things way up there in like in the spiritual realm that we're trying to get to, but you have to know that there's something there first. And so, like, if you can't touch it, then like it's all up here, like in your head, kind of thing. So
why can't you touch it?
I mean, in the example that I just said, it would just be because it's outside of our...
Okay.
Right, like the essence of chair. We know what a chair is. We can touch a chair.
Right, but
it's not. It's not that chair is just a participation in chairness.
Right,
which is a thing you can sit on.
There is a like. I don't actually know the answer to that. So
no, sure.
Like, but hopping over here to a related thing.
Yeah,
like it brings up a really good point, which is like, how do we actually know things, right? And most people would say we know things because of our intellect.
Right. Descartes would say that. Right. I'm serious. I think, therefore I am.
Yeah, dude.
Right?
No.
Yeah, okay. Like, because he can think, he says that things exist because he can think of them.
Right.
It's kind of a distilled version, but like, yeah.
Right.
Totally.
It's accurate.
You used the phrase just a second ago, which is that makes sense. So when we're looking at like natural anthropology, it's the physical senses are the foundation of knowledge. So Aquinas says that the physical senses are the material cause of intellectual knowledge. Most people skip over the senses. They just like, when they imagine thinking, it's just like this abstract thing, gaseous, whatever. But it actually is starting with the physical senses. So like, well, why is that important? Well, it's important for a million different ways. Like, one of the biggest, like, it's not a coincidence that as our work, like when you look at the history of work from agricultural age, industrial age to the information, or sometimes called the digital age, when you actually map out like, okay, work according to when work is being done, where work is being done, how it's being done, what is done in the work or what's made in the work, on all of these variables, when you progress to our current time, you are getting work becomes more and more abstract and less sensorial. So imagine like, I'm a farmer and I go out, like I just have to see the things that are wilting to like know what my to-do list is that day, right? But if like the thing that I work in has like no dimensional perspective, like visual perspective to it, and it's all just in one little box, and the only physical movement I do is this, like there's so much less sensorial context, and it's not a coincidence that we feel like so disoriented in that. The problem is then you have people that are, okay, so you feel really disoriented, like you want to get organized. If you don't have a informed understanding of human nature, you're not going to get to the root of the issue. Like you're just going to toss a bunch of tools at the thing. You're not going to reintegrate the person.
Something that comes to mind is I was listening to this 5-hour podcast the other day, and one of the things they mentioned on it was that this generation, now maybe this is just because we have people that actually do more research now, but it seems according to the research that this generation, since basically 2020 till now, is the most depressed, anxious, bankrupt, problematic generation ever. Yet we have the most money, the most technology, the most connection, even though that's digital, so it's not really real connection, but the most connection. But the people that report all of those symptoms have a phone, make above average salary, have friends, and they're still reporting depression, anxiety, etc. The people that live on a farm and raise their kids and aren't really connected to the world and just are involved in like local government tend to, and that goes further, single income, one spouse, more than 3 kids. Like there's kind of this category that it gets put into. All of them report statistically exponentially higher happiness and like almost zero depression, anxiety, all of that. So it's kind of interesting where we're in this technological age, we're at this point where we have endless people to talk to, endless connections, endless ways to connect with people, endless shows to watch. There's all of this thing, like there's this stuff that we can do, but every time we do that, we're further removing ourselves from like reality in a way, like in an attempt to be in touch with reality and to be in touch with people. And connection is a good thing. Like there's nothing wrong with using Skype or social media or your phone to be in touch with your family, but it has to be a real connection. Like you can't just be looking at your phone and saying, I got X amount of likes, therefore I have value. Right. So it's kind of this interesting place that we're at in history. And I think you can probably speak to this better than we can, because like I remember my dad not having a cell phone, but it was vague. And like, then he had a flip phone, then he had a cell phone. But now it's like most of my siblings have cell phones. We have laptops, we have computers. It's all technological. But like my grandparents still have a rotary phone. Like they don't even have a landline, or I guess it technically is a landline, but they don't have multiple phones in their house. It's just one rotary phone. So it's like you compare that to what we have, and it's the technology gap is crazy different. But I wouldn't say that I have better friends than they do, or I wouldn't say that I have more meaningful connections than they do necessarily. It's hard to compare, but I feel like that kind of ties into a lot of what you're saying. Is like we have this opportunity to be more and more connected, and the result is we're actually less connected and more confused, and we don't even know how to apply these principles because we're so far out there that you read this page from Aristotle and you're like, I have no idea what this means. I don't have this sensorial I can't think about nature and like kind of use that to understand my own self or my own connections or my own friendships, because I'm in this like oasis, or not oasis, like this abyss of nothingness that's all digital and has kind of ultimately has no meaning.
Right. Yeah. I hear 2 points in that. One is, one way that we put it is if you're missing a sense of connection, it's because you are literally missing a connection to your senses.
Okay.
The disconnected feeling is a natural feeling of things being disconnected in you, right? And that largely is in part because the person is conceiving of themselves as their mind.
I don't know what that means.
They're when they have
like their identity is just their mind.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Versus so like what they can physically do,
or like, did I just touch Anthony or did I touch Anthony's body?
Yes. Right. Both.
The person who conceives of themselves as just their mind would say you touched Anthony's body. Okay. So, this will be an interesting thing. So, paragraph 365 in the Catechism. Spirit and matter in man are not two natures united, but a single nature. So the average Catholic is running around, they're seeing, like a secular materialist. Maybe they're also seeing like a New Age Gnostic. And they're like, oh yeah, like there's that mistake over there that it's just like matter. Oh, and here's this mistake over there, just pure spirit. But we're not that. We're in between because we're matter and spirit. That's not what the Catechism says. It's not matter and spirit in man are not two natures united. So even if you put the word united in there, that's not actually the mean yet. the mean between the two extremes is that their union is so profound that it is a single nature. So like,
and is that just because we have a body soul composite?
Correct.
That can't be separated either?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, how the heck did we get onto that?
Well, this is kind of a side point. We don't really need to pursue this past, but something I've seen in like politics, this is less about theology, but I think you see this a lot where you're like, okay, I'm a conservative, I believe XYZ. Oh, this person, they're a libertarian, so they're in this box. And I'm kind of to your point where like, yeah, you can look at other religions and say, oh, they're not emphasizing this, or they're ignoring this. I think you see that in politics a lot where it's like the identity is not in Christ. The identity is not in being a son of God. The identity is, well, I'm pro Second Amendment, or I'm pro this and I'm pro that. And that's okay. You can have that, but your identity can't just be like the Constitution and then how you interpret the Constitution. That can be part of your identity, but your identity needs to be a lot deeper than that, because if your entire identity is the Constitution and then that just goes up in flames and the whole country is overrun, you shouldn't be lost. Like, you should still have meaning, you should still have purpose, you should still understand what direction you're going without that. That's a great additive that we have in America, but that shouldn't be what makes you, which is, I think is so fascinating when you have people who are conservative but are not religious, maybe vaguely Protestant. And it's like, okay, so you've kind of made conservatism or constitutionalism or libertarianism or whatever you want to call it your religion. Yeah. You're fighting for good things. Right. You're fighting for freedom, you're fighting for family, you're fighting for, pro-life, whatever, pro-gun. But you're doing it in a way where conservatism or the Republican Party is your religion. And so I don't know if we need to really go down that path, but that's kind of what it made me think of when you mentioned that, is like, I think there are a lot of people that they have their identity caught up in this thing. Right. And it's not bad to be caught up in that thing and identify as conservative or identify as pro-life. However, like, why are you conservative? And that, like, Roger Scruton says that, like, well, the biggest question to ask about a conservative is, what are we trying to conserve? Like, you can say you're conservative, but what are you conserving? Life, liberty? Yes.
So this, like, identity is a perfect theme, and this is like why we were talking about like what's the con of talking about technique without ensuring that there is first a foundation of telos under that, right? Because what is very common is like, there's like an analogy of like people being identifying as conservatives, but they're not actually conservatives. Right. I would say I would say the average Catholic is like running around and they're like, I'm Catholic, but like their conception of what it means to be a Catholic is like not actually the whole thing. And so if you just toss like techniques, just a label, right. It's not actually taking roots. And then the other thing is, if we are a fair amount of literature that's what we call in like modern productivity, like in that field, it's not coming from a place in which there is understood to be an immaterial soul. So there's not, like, what's my point on that? I've lost a good point on that, but you had a thought.
Well, I did, yeah. So I guess it's kind of funny because as to what I said, I was like, well, like it almost seems like you need the intellectual to go to the practical. Yeah. But then after what you said with like the material cause is our senses for things. And so my thought was just that, like, it's interesting that Christ came and told everyone to go do the practical thing and to do the sensual thing. So like clothe your neighbor, give food, give drink, kind of all these things. So I guess it is interesting because it kind of seems like there's kind of this tug with like, yes, you need to do, like, we need to integrate ourselves, or okay, maybe I should stop using that word, but we need to be able to I
think that's great. That's
have a foundation like, so like emotionally, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then the tug I my mind is kind of coming to is like, okay, but we need to know that that's the foundation.
To me, it seems like there's almost a
know
gap
that
in
what's
like,
the foundation.
That like we need like emotional, like, so like our human nature, so what our human nature is, and then like we need to have the vegetative or the animal soul, like we need to build up from there. But like, so we still need that knowledge though, like we need the knowledge that we, I guess, I don't know, it's just it's when people talk about like, oh, we're just like the plants or we're just like the animals, they're downplaying our like what it means to be human, and so they almost
But then so and to be very clear, I'm a very huge Aristotle fan.
Sure.
So his conception of virtue being the mean between the two extremes fundamentally changed my life. So and we can look at this like, because there's always two extremes. You have on one side, you have like the only thing that we are is just material. But there's an equally bad view over here, which overemphasizes the spiritual.
Right.
And it can fly under the radar, kind of like being a conservative, but you could like, there's lots of flavors of conservatives, right? Quote unquote conservatives. Is it, I think it's Victor Davis Hanson. He's author of, not Victor Davis Hanson, Victor Hugo. Sorry, very, very close. So Hunchback of Notre Dame. Yeah, he says, in being a soul, one ceases to be a man.
fact check, false.
So like just intellect, is that what he's trying to like?
Yeah, like
just
you can
being
have
intellect?
these like ghostly Christians that like they like view the body with disdain,
Yep.
you know.
And what's really interesting about a lot of this, it's hard to, I think sometimes you look at Catholicism and you're like, okay, there's all this stuff going on, and like, where am I supposed to be, and what's the mean between the extremes, and how do I actually like do virtue properly? How do I enact this in my own life? Like, I wasn't even trying to tagline it. How do I enact virtue in my life? But I think sometimes you can almost learn better by looking at the heresies. You look at a heresy and you're like, oh, they emphasize that the body was evil. Well, we know that the body is good.
That's contrast. That gets back to our point on contrast.
Or you like, oh, they think that the spiritual life is terrible. Well, no, it's not all about just physical pleasure. Obviously, like contemplation and prayer, and like there is a spiritual realm that we have to recognize. So, okay, so it kind of bounces you back and forth. And I don't think you should dwell on it because it's all negative. Like you shouldn't learn how to be good by just looking at sin.
Sure.
Because that's it's kind of like an imperfect approach where you look at sins and you're like, okay, these are all the things I'm not supposed to do.
Right.
But now what should I do? But it is a starting point, because if you just look at the things you should do, it might be like, well, I don't know what that means. But if I know that killing people and committing adultery and lying and cheating and like all of this is bad, okay, then I can realize, okay, but obviously the bigger question is, what does it mean to be a good spouse? But I have to know that what is being a bad spouse, and then why is that bad? And if you understand that and kind of the negative side of it, then you can hopefully the rest of your life delve into what does it mean to actually be the positive of that. And I think that sometimes Catholicism, conservatism, a lot of these things that are positive movements, and obviously Christianity and Catholicism much more so, will emphasize one or the other. They'll either emphasize the virtue aspect, and then you're like, okay, I get the ideal, but like that's not where I'm at right now. I'm kind of in the weeds here. That's not really helpful. Or it's just like, you terrible people, like this is not what you're supposed to be doing. And then you're like, well, I know it's not good. Like I know I'm not supposed to be doing this, but it's not helpful to like just feel like everything I'm doing is bad. I need the message of hope. Right. I need the ideal. Right. So I think that that's kind of a balance you need to strike. And I don't really know where that comes into play with like a work-life balance or workflow, but I'm sure it comes into play where like you kind of need to know the things to avoid, but then you also need an actual goal.
Yes.
You need a place to go. You can't just say, this is what you definitely shouldn't get up past 9. Yeah. It's like, okay, but why should I get up at 6? Like, is there a good reason to get up at 6? Because I might do it if there's a good enough reason.
So this gets back to the point of identity, right? Mm-hmm. So when you guys imagine, let's say there's like a visual, and like here's God, okay, and then here's you, Okay. And then you grow in holiness. Like, what happens to this picture right here?
Hopefully they get close.
So it's like this.
Like unison.
Right. Well, I guess like that. Yeah.
Like this.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then, like, do you, like, am I seeing a distinct thing here while it's here?
Right now, yes.
But like in your conception, that would be okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, how do you understand Galatians 2:20 then? So like, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
Sure.
Like, how do you conceive of that playing out?
Well, I guess it's just kind of the life of grace. So like God, like I guess it is kind of the tug between like I can do no good without grace. So like I'm still acting, and like it is me, but God is working through, not like in place of. Well, I guess in place of would kind of be the same thing, but I guess more as an instrument rather than like taking the place of.
Would you say the same thing, or do you have a different answer?
I think the way that I would think about it is that, well, it's kind of weird because you're dealing with free will, but there's a certain element of surrender, I think, that you have to go through, where God is still the primary kind of author of what's going on, and you're still acting, but you're acting in a way that, to the best of your ability, you're acting in accordance with what God is doing. But it essentially just boils down to a constant surrender of like, this is what I think I should do. This is what I've discerned I should do. And I'm just going to do it. And then if it doesn't work out or things change, then I'll assume that that's God's will. So I'm still acting, but I kind of recognize that there's another power that's also playing 10D chess, and I don't really understand what's going on. So I think that's kind of how I don't really think of it as, maybe this is wrong, but I don't think of it as God like taking over total control, because, well, like you still have free will. So you are acting. And I think a lot of it is it's trying to act in accordance with what you think, to the best of your knowledge, to what you think God wants you to do, rather than, I think there might be maybe it's just a kind of difference of terms, but I think there might be this mentality in Catholicism where you need to like abandon, right? Like you need to surrender. But I don't think it's always Jesus take the wheel. I think it's like, no, I'm driving, but like I hope that I get to the right place, and I'm praying to God that I get to the right place. But it's not just this like I'm giving up, I'm not active role. It's like I want God to take an active role, but that doesn't mean I'm taking my hand off the wheel. Like maybe one's on, and then like if I feel some tugging, I might go the other way. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing with free will, because I think that you don't want to be in a position of saying that God is controlling things and you're just hands back letting him do it. That's not happening. But you also don't want to say that you're the primary actor and God is just kind of in the background and he's just kind of like Santa Claus. Like you're trying to be good so that you get a present. Like that's also not it. So there's kind of somewhere in between where there's a mutual goal of holiness, or I guess a goal of holiness on your part, and then God also wants that for you, and there's a kind of an in-between area, and that's what you're constant, like I think that's what virtue is. You're constantly striving for, I don't want to go too far, but I also can't lack these things. So what's this median that I'm trying to reach?
Yeah, honestly, it makes me think like Jesus take the wheel. I mean, I don't know if the songwriter was Catholic.
I don't think
sounds like a very Protestant thing. So like
yeah, totally total abandonment.
Thing. Well, okay. I think we need to be careful with that.
This is why we're exactly.
Why do you need to be careful with that?
Because I don't think that's a Protestant thing.
Total abandonment?
Yeah. I think that's the same thing that you were saying as surrender. And I think that's the way that honest, I'm not sure the name of the person who wrote the tiny little almost pamphlet thing, total abandonment to God. But but I think so. I think those are the same thing. But I do think that the hands off the wheel, Jesus take the wheel is different than both of those. My understanding of total abandonment and surrender is I am surrendering my will and then through prayer and through my relationship with God, God's going to show me, or not show me, but like I will feel his presence
He'll
to do
guide
this
me.
one thing. Yes, exactly. To do this thing.
sure.
But then Jesus take the wheel is like, I'm not going to act.
Right.
And that's,
sure.
that seems
Sure. I think if you
different.
if you defined it that way, then I would agree.
And but my point was, it sounds, and again, I may be like construing this in a way that Protestants wouldn't, but it sounds very Protestant in the sense that like sometimes, and not all Protestants think this way, but like grace, like I believe that Jesus Christ is my savior, so then I'm saved, so then I can do whatever I want. But then Jesus is like going to save me in the end, kind of thing. So like,
it's kind of like you, regardless of what you do, as long as you have a good heart,
right,
that Christ is going to come in and bail you out,
right. And again,
which
that's
is different,
right? And that's not like all Protestants,
okay.
but it does sound like that is much more of a Protestant thought.
Okay, yeah.
But maybe that's wrong. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Andy?
So first a question, which is it good to be full of oneself?
It depends on what you mean by full of oneself.
The question of Beowulf, right?
Like, I mean, well,
I've always heard the best definition I've heard of for humility is that you shouldn't think less of yourself. You should just think about yourself less.
Right.
And I think that kind of rings true. Like, it's not that you should think that you're nothing.
Okay, this is great.
It's just that you shouldn't be thinking about yourself all the time. Because if you're thinking about yourself all the time,
you're not thinking about somebody else.
You're not thinking about somebody else. You're not thinking about Christ. You're not thinking about your family. But you also shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm a terrible person. I'm horrible. It's like, no, God's given me gifts. I'm going to use these gifts in the best way that I see fit. But I'm not going to think about myself, because as soon as I start thinking about myself, that's when the anxiety comes in. That's when the depression comes in. That's when a lot of things start happening, because I'm just self-focused. And I've seen this in my own life where, like, if you're having a bad day, the best way to counteract that is to do something for someone else, or like have people over. And then all of a sudden you're playing host, and then you're like, oh, I didn't think about myself all evening because these people were here and we were just hosting them. And it's just this total like reversal of interior reflection versus what do they need, right?
Are you yourself?
Am I myself? I don't know what that means.
In those moments?
No, like,
I mean, just in general?
Like you were saying, if I think about myself too much, I'll forget other people.
Yeah.
So, like, is that like if you think about Anthony too much?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's just kind of just generally thinking like, what do I need to do? What do I need? What's next for me? What's on my schedule versus like, what does my family need? What does my wife need? What do my kids need? It's not that I'm not acting for myself. It's just that I'm not the primary thought.
Okay.
Like, okay, obviously I'm going to like do the dishes because my wife needs that, but that also helps me. But I'm not doing it because I want the dishes done, right? So it's kind of like a selfless thing, and it might help you, but I think it's kind of making yourself the secondary or last place without disrespecting yourself. So I don't get up in the morning and be like, oh, I'm this, I'm that. Like, there's not like negative self-talk.
Yeah.
It's just that when I get up, I immediately do my best to be like, what does my wife need? What does my family need? What does my boss need? I try to make that the goal, and then that's going to make me better rather than how can I make myself better? I'm sure there's a way to do it, but every time I think about it, it's very selfish and self-centered. Whereas if you're working for other people, you can still accomplish the things that you need done, but you're not only thinking primarily about yourself. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, that's how I try to think about it.
So, well, this is really important because it all comes back to identity. So the consideration is this: is like all of us Christians believe that we are an image of God, right? So but then there's this disconnect, because it's like, if I look at an image of God, does that cause me to forget about my neighbors, or does that like catalyze me to think about my neighbors?
Well, it should catalyze you to think about your neighbors.
I think it depends on the image. I don't know.
Well, I think it's also it is also interesting because I think it sounds like there, but there is a misconception when we say I was made in the image of God. That doesn't mean you can see God's face, but that means that like I have an intellect and will, and that's the image, right? Isn't that like God doesn't look like me.
You're talking about looking at a literal picture, right? Like the Sacred Heart above your mantle. Looking at that, does that make you forget about your friends? Is that what you're saying?
God does not. Well, hold up, because Brian's is a good one. God does not look like me.
I mean, in the physical sense.
If you grew a beard, he might.
This is true. Longer hair.
Okay, but like he does more than it sounds like you think. Like, so here's one point.
Yep.
We so like you read Genesis, right? And God creates through his speech. Right? It's like, and God spoke and it was, right? Mm-hmm. So like the foundation of reality is communication. Divine communication, right?
Sure.
So like speaking of like things being like integrated, right? Like if we are really going slow on that, right? Then that means that matter is literally spirit communicated. Every single thing that we see, anything that is a manifestation of God. And it like, so by definition, it has some trace of him in it, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're not saying that God has brown hair or whatever,
right.
but like we're definitely not saying that it's random,
right,
non-essential information that you are displaying, right?
I mean, I guess I would say like in other things, it's not, so it'd be the transcendentals really. So like in matter, like if you see a tree or if you see an animal, it'd be like, well, it's God's goodness being shown in those, or God's beauty being shown in those, not his face. If that makes sense.
Like as long as that goodness and beauty is like in 3D, like
right.
You know what I mean? Like
right. No, sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's really because obviously like Jesus Christ is God's word.
Yes.
And he looks like a specific person. Like he looks like Jesus. I mean, he looks like the pictures or whatever kind of our thought of him. So, I mean, like in that sense, like sure. Or like, I get that. But whenever we talk about God, like especially in Genesis, when he's speaking and things are made and light, it comes, like it was once he said it. Like in the sense that we're made in male and female, my understanding was that like there are male and female aspects to God, but that doesn't mean that God is male or female. God himself is right outside of it. So we wouldn't say that like he looks like Anthony or he looks like you.
Yeah.
Like he looks like more, I guess my thought is he looks more like I guess what it means to be human in you guys or in us. Mm-hmm. Like he looks more like that than like my face.
Yes. Like we got into this point because it's like let me make one point and then we'll get into that. So sure. like a thought experiment, which is fun, which is like, okay, like close your eyes and then imagine divine revelation. Okay. And Anthony, what are you imagining?
I have no idea. Divine revelation?
Yeah, divine revelation.
Like the entire story of salvation?
Like how are you imagining revelation?
That? I mean, I think that the first thing I thought of was like the Holy Spirit as a dove.
Uh-huh.
But then it gets really complicated after that. That's kind of the initial thought is like God coming down to man and revealing truth.
Okay.
Like,
and Brian,
kind of simplistic.
What are you imagining, Brian?
Well, my first thought was
are your eyes closed?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
now.
good, because I can't tell because my eyes are closed.
Well, my first thought was scripture, so the written word. But then the more, like, once you asked Anthony, my mind was going to like St. Paul or St. Peter walking around at top, like saying, like, this is the good news.
Anthony's eyes are open, by the way. He's cheating.
It added nothing. I didn't get anything out of it.
No, do it. Close your eyes.
Wait, I did. I already answered. Why do I still have to close my eyes?
Because here's the punchline, okay? Now you take and you open your eyes, and you're seeing divine revelation.
I'm looking at Brian. I don't see the connection.
But, no, like literally, though, like God is revealing Himself. Like we have seeded the natural world as like this is some neutral ground,
Right.
like it's not neutral ground. Like things don't have to exist.
Right.
The fact that they are existing is because God is imbuing them with being.
Right.
So there's something being revealed in everything that we can see.
Right.
I'm not saying Scripture is not divine revelation.
No, right.
Right? But like this is divine revelation as well. Now, the reason I get into that is because the same reason why it's like, okay, like let's say you're trying to organize some conservatives. Well, you want to get clear about like what conservatism is rather than just like tell them how to get organized, right? But the like,
Sure. Yeah.
there's a fundamental identity issue for the average Christian. And there's two fundamental points. It's like one, they though they wouldn't say it, the way that they are living is one in which it's animated by self-hatred. It's not like they're going around saying that they hate themselves, but they view their fundamental nature of self such that it can by default will suck you away from other people, right? Or self-centered is an interesting word. Like, would we say that it's good to be centered in oneself? It seems like we would, but then we say like it's bad to be self-centered, right. Which brings up the question of like, what is self?
Yeah, I would say if you don't believe in God, you might say that it's good to be self-centered. I think if you believe in God, then it would be better to be centered on Him.
This is the point.
Right?
This is the point. I disagree.
With what I just said?
Yes.
Okay.
And I would say that the person who does believe in God is the only one who has the right to believe that it would be good to be centered on self. And here's why. Is because every single self is an image of God.
Yeah, but why wouldn't you just center on God and not worry about yourself?
Right. So this implies that we are not centered on God when we are centered on self.
Okay.
And that's the whole like crux. Is that
right.
Like that's not the case. Like if every being is,
well, I guess it depends on what you mean by centered.
Sure.
I think the idea, when I think of centered, I think of that's the only thing you're thinking about. If you're saying you can think about yourself and like not be self-obsessed, but like
so
self-concerned, but you're also pursuing God, then I would say yes.
Okay.
But if you're saying you could kind of only focus on one thing, well, I would say, well, it's probably better to focus on God than yourself, right?
It depends on the nature of the thing.
Okay.
So, like, when you look at Jesus Christ, does that mean that you never think of God the Father or God the Holy Spirit?
Yeah, I would say sometimes. You should.
Well, this is a personal problem.
I'm not saying that they are separate beings. I'm just saying, like, if I'm thinking about praying to the Holy Spirit for guidance, or I'm thinking about having a conversation with Christ about a thing, I'm not necessarily also picturing God the Father and the Holy Spirit at the round table with me. Okay,
right? I can frame it.
That's a visual thing.
I can frame it better.
Okay.
If you, let's say you have someone and they're getting closer and closer and closer to Jesus.
Okay.
Is that bringing them further and further and further away from the Father and the Holy Spirit?
No.
Right. So the argument is that that's God. That's the nature of God.
Right.
That
unity.
diversity creates unity. It doesn't create division. Right? Well, whose image are we made in? We're made in God's image. So, like, if we actually are made in his image, then we should partake in the same sort of pattern as him. And that pattern is such that, like, what does that image look like? The image looks like a communal one. So, like, if we're talking about the integrated self, the one that is not touched yet, the one before the fall, which should be our primary reference point, it's not like I can, like, get too zoned in on myself. If I'm looking at myself, by nature, it will reflect me back out to other people. Right? Just kind of like how we talk with Protestants. It's like, can you get too close to Mary? I mean, like, there's, like, the weird stuff. You can. But if you're doing it right, she's going to point you to Jesus. Right. So the point is, like, okay, you want to get organized. Well, like, who's getting organized? If you're not very, very clear that you want to be fully yourself, unqualified, like, what's the point of learning the techniques and stuff? The reason why I got onto this is you were talking about we learn things better sometimes when we hear about heresies. Well, it's like, so I got a list of propositions here that sound very similar to things that you would sometimes read in, like, a pious book on the spiritual life. Like, for example, this: after our free will has been resigned to God, we should abandon every thought and care about all that is ours to the same God and allow him to accomplish his divine will in us without us. Now, you guys are a little bit more on the educated side, but
well, thank you. I would.
If not all,
I wouldn't advocate that. But
if not all of that, the majority of that would fly under the radar, right? Of the average, whatever. That's a condemned proposition from Pope Innocent the
100%.
Yeah.
Well, and the first thing I think of is, like, you have to pray like everything depends on God, but work like everything depends on you. Like, you can't just pray.
It can't be without you,
and then just, like, not do anything. It's like God still wants your active participation. Sounds so bad in light of Vatican II and stuff, but, like, God wants you to actively live. Like, there is a life. You have free will. You have choices. You're given responsibility. There are things that you are supposed to do. And if you don't know what those things are, you should find out. But that doesn't mean you say, I accept God. It's kind of comes back to the Protestant mentality in some cases, is I accept God, now I can do whatever I want. And
but
it's like,
he wouldn't want,
not really.
He wouldn't want that participation if he who is participating is of a nature such that it sucks away from other people.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
How would, okay, well, so this is opening a can of worms, but just kind of a quick reaction. I've thought about this a lot, where the idea of you need to be involved in the community, you need to be self-giving, you need to not be self-centered, and then you apply that to, like, the life of a hermit, where it's like, that's their vocation, is to not be with the community, to not be with other people, but also to not be self-centered, and that's their vocation.
I think
it's kind of a different thing.
Right.
I think it's St.
separate,
Albert.
but
He describes that as leaving God for God.
Leaving God.
Like leaving,
like
leaving your neighbor for
who
God
is an
himself.
image of God, for another
sure
dynamic.
And I
of
guess
that
in another way,
relationship,
you could kind of compare it to, like, spiritual marriage, right? Where, like, priest or nuns, like, they're the bride of Christ, or the priest is the bridegroom, right? Like, yes, that's true in a spiritual sense, but you are physically being deprivated of that reality. You're not actually going to get married in a physical sense, but that doesn't mean that that reality is totally gone. It's just different.
Right.
I'm not saying it well, but I think that there is kind of something to that, where it's like, you're not married physically, and you're not going to have physical children, but you are married in a spiritual sense, and you are going to have spiritual children. Right. So you are abandoning an aspect of that, but also you're not just totally doing your own thing. Like, you're still kind of involved in that idea of, like, marriage and education and protection, and like that's why like we call priests father, right? It's not because they're biological fathers, it's because they can provide and protect and do the same things that fathers can do, but in a spiritual sense, not purely physical.
Yeah, no, and honestly, the only thing wrong with that sentence was without us, like the last two words, like that was.
So I agree with you, but I don't think that's what the average, like, I don't think the average Christian picks that up.
No, sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
And they're more, they more
attribute that, like, the surrender to that. Yeah.
And if you translated what they were asking for or intending, if you translate that into human to human relationship, it's an unhealthy relationship, right? So like, for example, I had a friend who like finished a big launch for her business, right? And then she was reporting about the success of this big launch to her board. Okay. And in this announcement, she said, yeah, they kicked it off last night. It was really great. It wasn't me at all. It was totally the Holy Spirit kind of thing. And it was just like, I'm so pumped about it. Okay. Sounds very nice, right? But it's like, okay, like grace builds upon nature. So it's not going to violate anything that's natural, right? So then you imagine like a daughter and a dad on a weekend, like they're making cookies, right? And they make cookies together. And then mom comes home and she's like, oh, Sally, like, that's so great. You made cookies. And she's like, oh, no, it wasn't me at all. It was only dad. Like, like, first of all, like, what would the dad say? Like, if he's a good dad, he'd be like, no, like, you did this. Like, we did this together. Right. And if he sensed in his daughter's voice fear that taking credit for something was detracting from his participation in it, we would say that that is a psycho.
Sure.
But like this resonates, right? Like this, when there's ways of operating in the spiritual life that don't fit that.
Right.
But they sound pious.
Right. Yeah. I guess my only thing is we need not totally, so like with other religions, so like in Hinduism or in Buddhism, like the person becomes nothing. So they pretty much would just become a part of God.
Yeah.
And so they lose their individuality.
Yeah.
So like that's not Christian. And the Christian idea is that even in God, you still have your individuality. And if anything, you're more yourself than without.
It's not a cookie cutter thing,
right? But and I absolutely understand the
bringing up so many good points.
The idea that like like when we become ourselves, like we're not losing ourselves, but we are still acting. And so God is acting through us, but we're still acting like we are doing the thing. It's just we're the instrument that God is using for this good work that he's doing. But
it's like the authors of scripture, right?
Right.
Like,
no, exactly.
Like God's the primary author, but they're the instrument by which this happens, and it's in their own style, in their own way, on their own time, but God is still the primary force behind that.
Right. And I don't know if this is kind of a side note, but not really. But I don't know if you guys have seen the show Supernatural. It's not a great show, so don't watch it. But in it, they like it's kind of honestly it's really dualist rather than Christian. Like it's got Christian aspects, as in like there's the angel Gabriel and there's the angel Michael and like all this stuff, and God and the devil and everything. But in the end, like there's a prophet who literally like doesn't do the thing when he's a prophet. Like he's like not acting. Like he's like pretty much like he's taken over and this thing happens to him. Right, exactly. Yeah. Which is not what we're like which is not us. Or not what we're thinking.
It just made me think of a couple things. Number one, possession.
Right.
Versus so like someone acting like a prophet or like a saint who is speaking on behalf of God,
right? Rather
than possession, where your will is totally gone in a sense,
right?
And it's just Satan,
right?
Like messing with you, right? Another thing to think about is, I forget what saint. I think it's a saint, but I know Jason Everett quoted this, and he was talking about how the reason why hell is terrible, among other things, like lack of God, right? Like, you know, you're going to be there for eternity, is that it's super boring because it's just you. Like it's you're isolated. It's just you, and that's kind of why I think that Dante's idea of like being in ice and just like it's just this horrible cold. There's no warmth. There's nothing. It's just desolation. Is kind of a good analogy for it. Whereas in heaven, it's not that every person that's there is the exact cookie cutter and everyone's exactly the same. It's like, no, everyone is as happy as they will be in the capacity that they were created, but they're all super unique, which is why it's interesting. Like that's why it's interesting to talk to people who are different. Because if Andy was the same as James, who is the same as whoever, every person we talk to would be bringing up great points, but they'd be saying the same things. That's not interesting. So it's interesting to have the diversity, but also the unification of those opinions. So it's like you're all seeing the same goal, but we might be getting to it in a different way. Or if nothing else, like that's why it's so fun where you meet people and you're like, they have a really interesting personality. Like I like them, but they have a really different personality. It's not just, oh, they're good, but they're literally the same as every other person I've ever met. Like that's no one wants that. Like that's super boring. No, you don't want to watch a TV show where every episode is the exact same thing. Except for Sight, just because it's funny. But like, no, you want different. You want things to change.
And so all that being said, back and forth, I think it sounds like, so yes, we need to be thinking and acting, I guess, in our integrated self, if that makes sense. However, it seems like just saying that is glossing over that we're not that. So like sin. So like we are not in fact our integrated self. Like we're not born that way. Like we're like, because we weren't born before the fall, we're not that. So it like, I feel like
okay. And then what about after baptism?
So
walked into that one.
Well, no. That is a good. That is a good point to bring up. But so after baptism, we are cleansed of original sin, but we still have concupiscence.
Totally. But like, if there's more of an error being made, it is underestimating the reality that God has redeemed our heart rather than overestimating that.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
And the reason why that's important is because we were just talking about like, okay, if we want to be integrated, we want to be in touch with our emotions, for example.
Right.
Now, someone who thinks that their heart is still fundamentally corrupt is not going to want to be in touch with their emotions. They won't tell you that.
Sure.
They'll say, of course, I'm in touch with my emotions. But they're ultimately going to be suspicious of their own heart.
Right.
And if they're suspicious of their own heart, it doesn't matter if they know how to get organized, because what the hell is getting organized at that point?
Sure.
No, know what I mean?
No, I absolutely get what you mean. And I think that like my mind is just kind of going to like it seems like there's a line that you have to play though, or you have to walk, because.
So in one sense, I agree with you, but like, so there's two things. Like in one sense, like first, there's the breaking in this point of, but if we're talking about, because like now we're getting a distinction further down, but before to get that, we're making this more fundamental point that let's say there is no disorder in self. Okay, the point is that like pure self is an image of God, right? Like, and so it's not, by its nature, it's not going to lead you away from God. Like, it literally is an image of God, right? And so, like, the mistake that we can often make is, like, we can look at all these false versions of being oneself, and we can hear all these things being championed of, like, I'm being true to myself, but, like, in the name of doing something that is a vice or is destructive. And then we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and it's like, oh, yeah, well, like, no, like, I'm not gonna like follow my heart. It's like I meant to sacrifice my heart.
Sure.
And then you get like a very you either get a Catholic or a Christian that is ultimately depressed and is not attracting anyone to the faith, or you get one who is doing a lot of stuff, but it's not being animated by love. And so either way, you're not making you're not building up the kingdom of God in the way that he wants. Right. And so there's just like, the reason why I'm getting at this is because the whole point here is that you've got these three things that cannot be separated, which is being organized, being oneself, and being God. And the whole argument is that you can't be one of those without being the other two. So someone can't be organized if they are not themselves. They can be very tidy and like inauthentic.
Right. Yeah, you'd have to. Defining your terms would be the biggest thing there.
Of course. Right. Yeah. Well, most people have the wrong conception of organization. They think of it as tidiness. Organization is coming from the Greek word organon, which means tool for making or doing. It's the same root for organs, like in our body, which is a very earthy, messy kind of thing, but also very functional and practical. Right. So yeah, there's getting what does it mean to be organized, correct? But there's also this element of what does it mean to be oneself, correct? Right. And do we view the self? Are we letting disorder define our primary image of reality, or are we letting the original form in which it was created define our language? Right. Most people are letting like the fallen, deformed version of beings or creations form the foundation of their language, and I think that's very confusing, ultimately.
Right. And honestly, now that you say that, it just made me think of something that my cousin and his wife told me, which honestly impacted me so like amazingly, because honestly, it's the reason why I'm pretty much where I am right now. Is the idea that God puts. So God wants the things we want, so he uses our desires to show us his will.
This is very important. Yes.
Right. And that is, so it is really hard. So like I'm here for that.
What did you say? He uses our desires to show us his will?
Right.
Correct.
So he's not working outside our desires, as in like, okay, like Anthony or even like we were talking about Mark earlier. So Mark and wanting to start a business, like he wants to do woodworking. Right. God's not going to be like, no, you have to become this thing over here and throw out all your other thing. Like he's going to use his will through that desire. Like his will is in that desire.
Correct.
Right. And so I guess my only thing is it can be hard to navigate that because we can kind of talk about it being like our desires is God's will, like all the time, full stop. And then also
I would say that. And then the qualification is like it's not actually your desire then if it's something that would violate.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. You would be in the bounds of sin and virtue kind of thing. Okay. Yeah. So I think that it is really hard. The distinctions are something that are just like so fundamental and so integrated in that you almost like just saying it is like, okay, this thing way over here. But it really is within these two walls here kind of thing, right?
That's why you bring it up in a long form podcast, because then you have time to make these distinctions. Yeah. But yes, I'm with you. Like, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So like purity needs to be in here, right?
Right.
But then there's like, let's not forget, a better way to say that is like, let's be damn sure to remember that if we are purifying, if we have a pure heart, then we have a duty to follow that heart. Like, because the heart is the dwelling place of God, right? The thing is, we've got these mixed signals of like people using that language, but not actually living in accord with the divine law, right? And so then we think like, oh yeah, like following your heart's bad, right? And then like the whole conception of like how we talk about vocations and vocational discernment, a lot of the time is very twisted. Like most people would not say vocational discernment is about following your desires. They would say it's about like sacrificing your desires to do like
to God's will, right?
right? Which twists the whole thing. Well, and then the other thing is like, it's not just it's not just concupiscence which muddies the waters. It's also our own disintegration. So like if we're like not trusting our own emotions or feelings, and we're only like staying up in our head, we muddy the waters. But also like there's a really great quote here. So sometimes I'll do this exercise where like I'll put a visual on, and the visual will look like this kind of like war strategy map, and you kind of see like two armies, okay, and there's like kind of different clusters in the armies, but there's clearly like kind of like a headquarters, right? And I say like, okay, like if you were facing that other side, like what would you prioritize? What would you focus your efforts on? And they always say like the home base, that's the supply center and stuff. And I'm like, okay, and then if you had two options, what would you choose? Would you choose to do some big, loud, like just like drop a bomb on the thing, or would you try to infiltrate it? And at first it's a big bomb, and then they start to think about it. It's like, well, you know, if I do the big bomb, like then they see what's happened, they can react and then like regroup and move their troops around. But if I infiltrate it, then if I have the runway time-wise, I could actually wreak a lot more havoc on the enemy if I do that. So the thing is like, what's like the supply center like for the person? It's the heart. So this is from the Catechism of the Ukrainian Catholic Church. The heart is the seat not only of feelings, because we usually just think like the heart's the feeling thing.
Right.
Not only of feelings, but also of cognition, self-awareness, and consciousness, as well as a human being's other spiritual powers. And then think of our conscious is a power of the heart. It's a manifestation of the heart. Like, they're like, oh, that's pulling on my conscience. Like conscience itself is an interesting word. It's like with, and scientia, which is like knowledge. So it's joint knowledge. Right. So it's like the joint there is your conscience is both you and God at the same time knowing something. Right? Where I'm going with this is the devil's not an idiot, and he's going to prioritize his offensive attack on the thing that's like the greatest return on investment. So it's not only do we have concupiscence in the mixture, we also have our own ways of times in which we're acting in a disintegrated way. We also have spiritual influence and spiritual attack on the heart. And we can bet the farm that the number one thing that the devil wants us to believe is that our heart is fundamentally bad. Right? Because if he gets that down, then we're not actually going to be ourselves. And if we are not actually going to be ourselves, then we're not actually going to be an image of God in the world.
Right.
So this all kind of ties in. Well, so let's just make it one more spicy layer, which is, so we're talking about the triangle, the 3 B statements: be organized, be yourself, and be God. So another piece of this is like, first of all, like, are we fully aware that like the goal of the Christian life is to become God? Like that's not asking too much. Right. It's not, we don't qualify that. Like that's why Christ became man, so that man might become God. Okay. Right. That already will stir some feathers, but that's the tradition. Right. But the further point here is, if we are being organized and that organization is not creating some sort of supernatural ripple effect into the world, as in we are not being God in the way that we are being organized, it's a false form of organization. We're not actually being organized. And then going in the other direction, if we are being God but we're not being ourselves, then we're doing we're doing some form of the heresy of quietism, or some sort of form of what you were saying with Hinduism, where we just get subsumed or melted into God. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it is. Yeah. I guess my only reaction is just like all of this is based upon the distinctions, seemingly. Like the distinctions between what we mean by getting organized, which is very different from being tidy. And it's totally different from being tidy because it's within the being yourself and also being God, but then also in the sense like that being like just the statement, like you have to do these while doing the thing that is being God is. I mean, would you say that that's really just within the confines? Well, actually, my first thought is it would have to be within the confines of Christianity, but then also, so I guess you're saying that, well, yeah, I guess let's just go with that and then I can. So you would say that would be within the confines of Christianity.
Yeah, this is not possible outside of Christianity. Correct.
Right.
Which is why I rebranded from Art of Workflow to Heal. I mean, Heal is not an explicitly Christian thing, but
right.
I needed the space within the brand to be unqualified about, we are talking about supernatural realities here.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And then, one of our core values is authenticity. Right. And so it's the whole thing is lined up as like, I am a Catholic. I'm going to be disauthentic if I don't lead with that. Right. So yes, 100%. This is not possible outside of Christianity.
Understood.
The other thing though is like within Christianity, like, okay, there's 2 points. It's like, yeah, we do need to make these distinctions. I mean, my takeaway from that is like, there's important work to be done for cleaning up our own language. Right. The other thing is, okay, like someone, but even once the qualifier things are in there, the person wasn't thinking that before the thing started. Like they weren't thinking that do you know what I mean? Like
those that it's not this thing. He was thinking more of like this way, and we're kind of like.
I think I mean this. Like you have those 3 B statements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be organized, be yourself, be God. Okay. So usually when I talk to a Christian about this, the be organized, yeah, great. Be yourself, like, and it's like be God. It's like whoa, like what's going on here? And then you can have some qualifications and distinctions, and then they'll be like, okay, well, like given that, like fine.
Right.
But the fundamental point here is like they weren't thinking that way before any of the distinctions came in. Right.
Yep.
The very fact that they're getting surprised and then you have to have the distinctions in there is evidence that that's not on their radar.
Right.
So what's on their radar? Usually it is be tidy, or be messy so that I can be creative, because most people think organization is in opposition to creativity. So they have that element, they have that distortion there. They usually think be selfless, right? Which I'm, again, like when I'm saying it is a good thing to be selfless, but not on a metaphysical level. Like we shouldn't be not ourselves. Right. But in the way that it's used, yes. But like, they're certainly not thinking like, I want to be centered in myself. We could say that. They're certainly not thinking that. And the whole reason why that's important is because like God had a reason why he made you. Like he wants you to be yourself. And to the fact that you are not yourself, you are hiding an image of him. Right. And then you get to the third part, and most people would say like, well, like I'm called to be like God, or like I'm a child of God. But like child of God has been so domesticated. It's just like this weird Sunday school thing. It's like, I'm a child of God.
Right.
But like if we weren't raised like in this thing and taking all of that for granted, like if we walked down the street, we never heard that term before, and we were talking to somebody and I was like, like what are you? And they said like, I'm a child of God. Like we'd be like, what the hell does that mean? Like you are a divine offspring. Like what does that mean? But so I agree, like distinctions get made, but also there's distortions before those distinctions get introduced. And also there's patterns in way we speak that reinforce the necessity of all these distinctions.
Right. Because all the distortions are so available and so just like imprinted on everything that we talk about. Like kind of all the things that we're like consuming in news or in just like things we read and everything. We're all always getting bombarded by these like just distortions of like organization and creativity. Like those things are like opposites rather than because it's totally to the fact that like all like a lot of people have said this. I don't think it's like a direct quote from any one person, but like all the evil people throughout history are all the same, but then all the saints are the ones that are. Oh, is it Chesterton? Okay, so like all the saints are the ones that are different. Like all of them are so different from each other, and they all have different charisms. They all have, and it's right. And so that is totally.
I'm all on board with that.
Right.
Like so 100% no qualification. Yes. And then you look at like what's happening day to day. Like if we're being honest, like how do those outside the church view those in the church? And yes, their vision is skewed, but also they are seeing things that are real. Right. And it is fairly typical for like us to lose our flavor, right? And just kind of just like blend in the crowd and be focused on I mean, it's a form of fitting in, but I'm just saying, like Christians are not known. Yeah. The stereotype is not that Christians are very diverse,
right?
Like, and I'm not talking about DEI
which is so
diverse,
interesting, because like Christ very explicitly says, like you're the salt of the earth,
right?
You're supposed to bring flavor to the earth. You're supposed to bring light to the darkness. Right. You're not supposed to just be like the random guy at a bar that no one would notice. And that's not to mean that you need to like announce your arrival or like wear gaudy clothing, but it's like you should stand out in a way, by the way that you act, by the way that you speak, by the way that you treat people, you should stand out. And if you're fitting in, you're actually doing something wrong because the world hates you. And
honestly,
like they should persecute you.
Right. No, totally. And honestly, it almost seems like
that's a nice, keep going.
Well,
I won't lose it.
It seems like it's pointing to the fact that like now we very much talk about ourselves and talk about other people and what they do. So it's like, okay, this person prays this thing. So it's kind of like, it's like this thing, like, because they do that, that's their identity. And then like people say that, or it's kind of throughout society and kind of just
or goes to this church, right?
Right. And but then like, there's nothing more than that. They almost, I don't know, I guess, would you say that is, well, maybe it's both. It's a shortcoming of the person that is doing the thing, but then also the person who is seeing the thing.
Yeah, I could see how it could be both.
Because like if it's like we need to be like, because we have we need to be going to church every Sunday. We need to be going to mass every Sunday because like Christ is there and we're able to receive him there. But then also like we're supposed to be praying every day and we're supposed to be doing all these things. So it's like this is the foundation. But it like the problem is that becomes our identity and then we don't do other things.
Well, I think a part of it is downstream from the identity issues. Like how are we fundamentally conceiving of self, right? And then one of the ways that this spills out is how we conceive of humility, because we think like, here's the thing, is like we know like truth can't like contradict truth, right? Like it can only complement truth, right? Well, goodness is the same thing. Like goodness isn't going to contradict goodness. Like there's the unity across all these things. So then vice or virtue shouldn't ever be able to contradict virtue. But like, here are two virtues that in the average person's mind contradict each other: humility and magnanimity, most people conceive of humility as the opposite of magnanimity, basically. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like we get that wrong. And my argument is that we get that wrong by in large part because we get self wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And because would you say that, I guess there are probably other reasons. My mind is very much going to like, because we,
I think the devil's number one target is self. Like the number one focus is to instill self-hatred. So then you get two different extreme reactions against that. You get like, it's kind of like we talk about the mystical body of Christ is like, well, what happens in a natural body? If there's like a misalignment over here, it's going to show up. Like if your bottom left hip is like out of place, it's going to start making weird things in your top right shoulder. Right. So you have all these weird, like you have this hyper false sugary celebration of self, and then you have this like stoic like sacrificial thing, right? And it who cares, right? Like as long as we're not getting self correct, right? Like there's a Saint Francis de Sales quote. It's like the enemy does not care how many good ideas you have. Like he'll feed you more and more good ideas as long as you never execute them, right? So yeah, I think that's ultimately what's going on again, and that only makes sense if we actually soak in the profound significance of the fact that when God created us, he was creating us in his image.
We're going to come right back. We can keep talking about being organized, being yourself, and being God and what that means. Let's take a short break. Mark, let's cue the music. John Jack, who runs a podcast called B is for Business, who he had Andy on, I don't know, November maybe of last year.
Something like that.
And he reached out to me and told me that we should connect, which was funny because he was already on my list to talk to, and he works in the building that we have our studio in, and so it worked out. But yeah, check out that episode. It's probably I wouldn't say a Spark Note version of what we're talking about, but I think it was about an hour. So, yeah, definitely worth checking out. I'm about halfway through it, and I'll probably finish listening to it and then realize that there are questions that I wish I asked you, but that's okay. You can just come on again. So where we left off was you have a business that you run called Heal, and it's not spelled H-E-E-L, and it's not H-E-A-L, it's H-E-L. And there's a line over the E.
Yeah.
Is that Greek?
Or so it's actually a couple different things. So it's it has roots in an old Frisian.
Old what?
Frisian. So like
what's Frisian?
Frisian's like Northern Europe.
Okay, like French and
Like I kind of think
Asian?
like no, but we'll go with that.
Okay, Upper Europe.
Yeah,
Okay.
but so so in Old Frisian it is the word for whole, and then in
It kind of sounds Germanic. Is it just heel? Like, not because it sounds like Heil. That's not what I'm trying to say. But you said, but like European heel, whole. Okay.
yes, yeah, and then in Hebrew it means divine life. So
Interesting.
and then in sailing there's a sail term called heeling. It's not spelled the same way, but we played on the sound. And in sailing, heeling is when the sail catches the wind. So the whole idea is that if one is integrated, out of integration, that's what creates ease. That's the ground of ease, right?
Okay.
And that's what people want. That's what they're looking for when they say they want to be organized.
Yeah.
And then whether inside or outside the faith, because even if you're not a Christian, you still have this hunger. It's like you can get really productive and do a bunch of things, but at the end of the day, like you were made for God, right? And so you're not going to be satisfied unless you're participating in his life. So it was a matter of like, I couldn't find a phrase that had everything. So we like just picked a new word that contained it in there. Yeah.
One of my favorite lines from Aristotle, and I haven't decided if I want to get this in Greek or just in English, but I think it might be one of the best lines he has in all of his works. It is the job of the wise man to order. And I've just always thought that's so interesting because it's the job of man, right? It's the job of the wise man to order. And then you're like, okay, what does it mean to be wise? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to order? Like it's all of these questions come out from that, but you don't disagree with it. You're like, okay, I think that's true, but I also have a million questions. And I just think that's so fascinating because that's what a lot of his work is based off of is like you need to come to a certain wisdom. You're human, which has certain implications. And then because of those things that are true, there are other things that fall into place. And there is a way to live an ordered life which leads to flourishing, and then he fleshes out what that means as best he can.
That messes the whole thing up.
but that's messes the whole thing up. But that's the first tenet, or I don't know if you would call it tenet, pillar, cornerstone, something of heal is to be organized. Would you say that being organized is the same as being ordered? Because you said that it's not being tidy. Because being tidy is just like, I would say germaphobe. That's the extreme. But just like where things are in their place.
Yep.
But what does organized or ordered mean?
Yeah. So one way you can think about it is like to be organized is to be an organism. Like that's a way to think about it. So it's much more about essence than efficiency. Or another way you could say that is organization is much more about one's end goal, one's telos, rather than like the tools, right?
What's more proper rather than what's easiest or what's
So organization looks different for different beings. So like, I was on my friend Sarah and Kyle Wester. They basically do parent coaching. Okay. And so we were talking about this, and then Sarah's like, ooh, like my bookshelf behind me, I guess it's like not organized because it's tidy. I was like, well, actually, no, like for a bookshelf, like that's very proper for all the books to be lined up. Like that's very functional, right? So organization looks different depending on the thing, because organization is the pure like reflection of the thing, right? It's much more about, most people think organization is external rearrangement, but it's much more about internal re-engagement. It's like being the thing that you are.
I feel like that sounds nice, but I don't really know what that means.
Sure.
Like, okay, so something I'm thinking of is like a car engine. Maybe this is a horrible example, but like a car engine, you might look at it and say, that looks disorganized. I don't know where all of this goes. I don't know what needs to come off to get to where, but it works.
Yes.
And there is kind of a symmetry.
Right.
And there is a design.
Yep.
Like there was obviously an intent behind this. And I can't recognize that, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
Is that kind of how you would look at things? Like, oh yeah, maybe this person to me seems disorganized, but for them or the way that they live, it's actually fine that they never hang up their coat because they just leave it on the couch. But then when they get up in the morning and leave, they just grab it off the couch. Like that might seem disorganized, but for their life, it might be the most efficient / ordered way of living. And that's just different from me.
Yeah. Organization does look different person to person for sure. And it's much more about functionality and movement and life than it is about like static categories, right? So like, what would be an example?
Do we see this in like the animal kingdom more, where it's like you might see animals like maybe bees or ants or something, and there's kind of like a sense of, wow, that like ant mound looks kind of disordered, but you also realize that there is kind of an order that's instilled. It's instinctual. Like you don't need to get into why they're doing it the way that they're doing it, but it's like, I wouldn't build my house out of this mound of dirt.
Yes.
But for them, that's perfect, and they do it perfectly as it should be.
Yeah. No, that's a great example because it brings up this like other kind of like higher order point, which is like, well, look, we know that nature is ordered, right? So like, but like, and then like, let's go out and look at nature. Like, what does nature look like? There's like, from our, modern standards or whatever, there's like a lot of messiness and inefficiency in nature, right? But it actually is, it's order. It is the default standard for order, right? And so what happens in nature, there's and what happens in organisms, like there's letting go of waste, like there's branches like fall down and then like decompose, and like there's the cycle of the seasons and there's movement. But then like you look at someone's like full focus planner and it's like their quarterly goals are laid out and they have their 5-year strategic plan. And like, don't get me wrong, like those things are really important. But if you get attached to those things, you're living something, it's very quickly able to become sterilized and not have the force or the energy of life behind it. And then at that point, my point is that it's no longer organization. So like just a funny example, like one thing that we do, like amongst practitioners is like, if someone's having like a crazy week and like, they speaking on multiple podcasts or like they just launched a new course or something, their desk is a
disaster,
big mess, right? So then we take a picture of it and we say, oh man, I'm super organized this week. And then if they ever end up cleaning their desk, they're like, oh, my office is so disorganized. It's just like a funny way to flip it on its head.
Sure.
It's all about fruitfulness. It's like are you being fruitful? Right?
Yeah. I think it must also come down to, I guess there's a few things I'm thinking of, but one thing it might come down to is like almost like a tolerance. Like certain people like things to be clean. So if their kitchen's not clean, their bedroom's not clean, whatever, like that affects. Now I get that organization goes beyond just the physical, your bedroom or your kitchen or something. But like if those things aren't clean and put in the right order, then the rest of your day is kind of off. I'm less that way, but I think that other people, and that's not to say that I don't like things. I think I've told my wife this a few times where I'm like, I prefer when the house is clean. Like if I come home and the house is clean, it feels better. But if I come home and the house is dirty, I don't feel the urge to clean it.
Sure.
I'll just go to bed if I'm tired. Like I'm not like, oh, I have to clean this, otherwise I won't sleep.
Yeah.
Some people literally cannot sleep if the house is dirty, right?
Sure.
And that might extend beyond the house. Like if their car is dirty, if they feel like there's a to-do list that they haven't finished, or there's prayers they haven't said, that like it's cluttered and they need to get rid of the clutter before they can have like a clean slate. That kind of makes me think of, so if you're talking about organization, how does that relate? So obviously like God puts all things in order.
Yeah.
If we are trying to emulate, like, be perfect as God is perfect, how is God organized, and then how, obviously people can be organized in different ways, but what are the ways that everyone should be organized to reflect the way that God is organized?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. So I hear two things in that. One is, again, like an affirmation of organization is going to look different for different people.
Yeah.
Again, St. Francis de Sales talks about, he picks up on the language like in Genesis 2 and 3, where God's creating Eden. He talks about plants bearing fruit each according to their own kind. And then he says, like, we're the living plants of the church, and we should be bearing fruit according to our own kind, not according to someone else's kind. So, like, the married father who is trying to live like a monastic monk, like, he's got it mixed up. And the monastic monk who's trying to live like a married father has got it mixed up, right? So there's that point. And then to the other point, the way that I answer that is like, so there's like, what does organization look like? But like for us, ultimately, we're saying, when I was studying David Allen and then Thomas Aquinas and trying to overlap these things together, part of what I was seeing is like, you can actually make a behavioral model for this. So it's like, so if someone wants to be organized, yes, it's important to create that vision. And then also it comes down to specific behaviors. So like we could do a tour of those behaviors. Like that's how I would flesh out further, like what does it actually look like to be organized?
What, just for kicks, what would that look like? If I said, hey, Andy, I'm having a lot of stress or anxiety or whatever about feeling like I'm behind or late for things or not organized, what are some like concrete ways that I can be more organized and like, yeah, kind of get to that point, like where I can say I'm an organized person. Like what would, if a client comes to you and says that, how do you walk them through that?
So I'll answer different because I think you're going to want this other answer. Like, because that one's my answer is going to be like, well, I need more information on the particularities of the person. Right. But like, so I can give you the form, which is going to be better in this situation. So there are certain actions that create what we call disorganization. And then there are certain actions that create organization. Okay. So first we'll like lay out what would be facilitating disorganization, and then we can explain like what's the opposite of those things, right?
Okay.
So we'll talk about 4 things. One thing that makes someone feel really overwhelmed is when they're giving you the clue in their own words. I've got so much on my mind, right? Mm-hmm. They literally have so much on their mind. As in, one of the things that creates disorganization is forgetting that we are meant to distribute our cognition in the world and not just keep everything jammed up in here, right? So it's hard to do that if you identify subconsciously with just your mind and you're not identifying as a person, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So what's the reverse of this? The reverse of this is
therapy. I'm just kidding.
Organization.
Okay, that's probably a better answer. I did not mean to derail you.
No. It's a tempting derail because I think it's a very related thing. In fact, David Allen makes a point. I think it's in Making It All Work, where there's a disproportionate amount of mental breakdowns that happen in organizational stores. So think like Staples or Container Store or anything. It's actually true.
Who's running the stats on that? Oh, another one down. That's 6 for Staples today.
So
that's actually interesting, though.
Yeah. So 2 things are happening when someone keeps something in their head. Mm-hmm. They are not recognizing it. Okay. And they are not incarnating it. Okay. And both of those things need to happen. So like if I
well, it's like similar with like grief, right?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that would be an example of like telling someone is not going to fix what happened, but if you just keep it inside,
yeah,
that's going to ruminate and cause more problems potentially than if you can just tell someone what you're feeling and kind of get to acceptance or get to like peace by at least talking through it. Right.
Yeah. So like to, I don't know, give like a everyday kind of example. It's like, say you have the experience of like, you are at the house and like there's a light bulb that needs to be replaced, right? And you're like,
okay,
shoot, like I need to make sure to get that, right? But then when you go on errands, you don't remember that you need the light bulb. You pick up the groceries and then you come back, and then it's only when you're like there that you remember the thing. And then that, for many people, that can continue in
many
that
times, yeah, sure,
circle for a long time. So part of what's happening is like it's very possible to think of something and even feel it, but not to recognize it. So recognizing, if you actually look into the word, it has a couple different meanings. One is to view, basically there's a spirit of gratitude in the word recognize. So think of like this person was recognized for their service, right? Most people, when they have an idea of something that's incomplete or to be done, they view it as an interruption rather than as a helpful internal reminder. It's not animated by like, oh, that's like great. Like, I'm going to make note of that. It's like, oh, shoot, there I am again. I suck. Like, I always blow it, you know? Right. So there's a shift there. But then also to recognize something is to understand that it has the authority to speak at that moment. So think of in a court, like the judge recognizes the plaintiff, or like, you know, I'll mess up the legal term. I don't know, but
it sounds good to me.
Yeah. Checks out. Yeah. So again, like when that internal voice of like, oop, don't forget this, or like, like, oh yeah, that, like we can hear it without understanding that it's trying to help us. So here's one way that we put that into words. It's like most people get overwhelmed incorrectly. They think overwhelm is a sign that there's that the answer is missing. Most people think that overwhelm is a sign that the answer is missing, and the reality is it's a sign that you're missing the answer. But the positive side of this is like you can't miss something if you don't know what completion looks like. Like it's like the sensation of hunger, right? It's like we have sensations because they can be fulfilled, right? So like we feel hungry because we can do something about it, and it's a helpful I don't know, like reminder or something, right? Okay. So, but overwhelm is the same thing, but most people misinterpret it. They think it's like a sign that something bad's happening, right? And so why would you want to recognize something if it's dangerous? So there's, it may sound like we're really kind of like, but this is so important because this is the biggest mistake that people make, is it's a lack of recognition. It's very simple, but it's right in front of the nose, which is exactly why you miss it, right?
Okay. So
there is a chronic misinterpreting of stimulation. There is, this is also why we define overwhelm as the optional habit of ignoring clarity. Optional, it's totally a choice. Habit, it's repeated over again and reinforced. Optional habit of ignoring clarity. So when someone is feeling overwhelmed, it's only a signal that they understand that some solution is available, right? Otherwise they wouldn't feel it.
So they just don't want to do the solution?
Well, usually they don't think it's possible, and they don't think it's possible because it's still in the head, right? So that brings us to the second part of the thing, which is incarnate the thing. So that usually looks like writing a little note down, right? Scribbling something on a sticky note or in your phone or a voice memo or whatever. Now, there's a couple different mistakes at this point, like most people. And so you can only talk about all four, like they're all like, there's four behaviors, but there's no first, second, third, and fourth. It's not a linear process, right? So you're going to hear me weave in and we're going to dance around. Sure. But like right now, there's some people that are hearing that and saying like, wait, no, I do that and I'm still really disorganized. Like, come look at my desk. It's filled with sticky notes, right? So it's not like I don't recognize the thing and I don't write it down. So then what else is happening? Well, there's three other things that are not happening. One of the things is that they are never returning. They don't have some sort of, you can write something down and throw it over there. And then you can write another thing and throw it over there. And then you're never going to have them in one consolidated place. So beyond just externalizing something, you want to collect it. Collecting implies that there's some centralization in which the things that you've externalized are eventually coming back to one place. If they're coming back to one place, then you actually have a chance of picking it back up. But most people have 50,000 different places, so they don't come back to it. So usually they're like, well, what's the point of even writing this thing down? Because I'm just going to forget it, right?
Yeah. Or not have time to do it.
Or not have time to do it, right? And so usually they're operating in a now or never state. So if they're going to figure the thing out, they think they need to figure it out as soon as they have the idea. Well, often the way the mind works is like we have really great ideas when we're in motion.
Right.
Right.
I've seen that happen a few times where like we'll be talking to someone on the podcast or I'll have a thought and I'm like, that is awesome. I should do that, but I can't do it right now.
Right.
And I'll literally like write it down and then put it on my calendar for like a month from now and just put like reminder, think about this thing, and I'll just write it down. And sometimes it's nothing, but sometimes it'll be like, oh yeah, that actually was a good idea.
Right.
But I just couldn't think about it then because I was in the middle of something. I was on the phone with someone. I was driving somewhere. But like, I don't want to lose this thought. And I think in a month from now, either I'll say that was stupid and I'll delete it.
Yep.
Or I'll be like, yeah, that actually was a great idea and I want to return to that. Yep. But if I don't do that, I'll probably just forget it. And I think that probably to a much lesser degree, but I think comedians, actually to a much greater degree, comedians do that where they're like, oh, I have a really funny idea for a joke. I don't quite have the punchline.
Yep.
But I'm going to write it down so I don't forget it. And then I'm going to come back tomorrow and try to figure this out. But if they don't write it down right then or like figure out a way to kind of put it in writing, it's just gone.
Correct.
And they'll just forget it. They can't, there's no recall, but like something they're thinking about, something they're having a drink with someone and some topic comes up and they're like, oh, that's really funny in the moment. And then later, if they try to recall that, it's gone. So they have to kind of like document it, you know?
Yeah. So this is coming into a couple of the other behaviors. I'll say a couple things. Like one thing right there, like that's somewhat fairly common. Another thing that a lot of people do is email themselves notes, right?
Sure.
The thing with the calendar is like the calendar is like when you put something in the calendar, it's like putting a paper boat in a stream. Like there's a motion to the calendar because you are moving forward, right? So then either it gets left behind or you have to do this like
pushes forward
demoralizing ritual.
Yeah.
And then the thing is like humans are really bad at estimating time, right? But the whole framework of a calendar is everything is dependent on time. So like a very easy fix for this is like storing ideas in some other place other than the calendar that's not structuring the information according to time. Right.
I 100% agree. I haven't figured out how to master this. Maybe you have some ideas.
Yeah.
But I think that it is healthy. Maybe not the 5-year plan, but I think a good, what I try to do is like, I have a Google Doc and it's like 5-year plan.
Okay.
Like I want to be here in 5 years. I want to be doing these things. And that kind of changes and I edit it. But like, that's generally the direction I'm going. Then I have the 1-year plan and it's like, by the end of this year, I need to have this stuff ready for taxes. I need to have the oil changed in the car. I need to have, and that's the year plan. And then I kind of have a month plan, and that's usually in like notes, like the notes app on my phone. Like, hey, this month, get these things done.
Yep.
But then on a weekly basis, it's talk to this person, call this person, pay this bill. and I purposely don't put it on a long-term plan, and I keep it on the daily thing, because I know there's 50 items and I'm not going to get to all of them. But if I have a lull in the day, I can say, all right, I'm going to do 2 of these right now. What can I do? All right, I'm going to call this person. I'm going to send this email. And then I push it to the next day, and it's annoying to push it to the next day, but it reminds me that it's still there. Whereas if I just put it on the 5-year plan, it's like, well, then tax season is going to come around and I'm never going to do these things. So I purposely put stuff on my day that's like, otherwise my day is wide open and I just need to go to work and come home at 6, you know? But it's like, no, I actually want this annoying reminder of, you have to pay this bill. You need to send this card. You need to, do whatever, because otherwise I'm going to forget about it. And I need that reminder, even though it's annoying to push it to tomorrow and be like, I didn't get any of that done. Yeah. But I do need that. And I do wonder if there's a way to, well, like when we had Father Jason Stokes on, his episode will go up soon, and he's a big fan of extreme ownership. So Jocko Willink's book. And I think the first tenet is prioritize and execute, right? So it's like, you're not going to be able to do 30 things, but you can do one thing and you can do it right now. So what's the one thing you're going to do right now? Okay, well, I've been procrastinating on whatever. Why? Just do it. Do it and check it off, and then it's not gonna make your list go away, but it is gonna subtract one thing. And that's the way that you get through the day. Is I can't do everything, but I can do a few things. And that's something, I think he maybe mentioned this the first time he came on, is he was like, it's statistically proven that you're really only going to be able to do like 2 or 3 big things in a day. Like, you'll have a meeting, you'll have a phone call, you'll send an email. There's other things you can do. You can be juggling other things, but like realistically, you're only going to be able to do a couple of big things in a day. So really think about, like, what are these things that you need to be doing today? Like, is it a family thing? Is it a work thing? And then just do those things. And then if you have time for other stuff, you can do them. But if you don't do those things, other things are going to fill up and you're not going to get those things done. You just aren't. Like, you're not, even if you time block, even if you're super organized, you're not going to get those things done. You know?
So there's, I hear 4 things in that. So the first thing is
nice, good.
What if you could still be reminded, but not have to go through that daily ritual process?
Okay. Love it.
You would like that better than what you have now?
Maybe. I guess it would depend on what the reminder is. Like, what's the reminder?
Well, we'll get there.
Is this like me telling my wife to remind me?
No.
Okay, because I wouldn't want that.
On your phone.
I mean, I get that through the calendar. I don't know. It depends on what,
not that.
Honestly, it depends on what the reminder is. Like,
sure.
So, like, there's apps like you're doing Exodus 90, right?
Yeah.
And then I have the Hallow app, and it'll be like, reminder, pray today. And it's like, sometimes it's annoying because I'm like, another notification. You're making me feel guilty for not praying. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, perfect. I'll do it right now because I have time. So I think it depends on when you set the reminder. So I need to you have to be kind of intentional about, when do I want this reminder? Well, I get up at this time and I have this window. So at 7:30 every morning, if I get this reminder, then I'll do it. But if it comes at 10:30, I'm going to be driving. I'm going to be at work. I'm going to be doing something. I'm just going to delete that notification, or I'm going to mute that. So I think it depends on what the reminder is for, and like kind of when it comes in. Like, is it a text, or is it just a so like what's the form?
There's a couple different answers to that. Like, so one is just like a kind of like quick and dirty one, which is I have not found monthly to be a rhythm that provides enough return on investment. I found daily, weekly, and basically quarterly, and then yearly and beyond. There's something about monthly that is like, it's not needed if you really do weekly and you really do quarterly, right? So I'm
trying to think of something specific to rebuke you on that, but I don't know. I guess the only thing I can think of is, like, at least in my scenario, like, let's say maybe other people have this, like, okay, I don't need to take the trash out every week, but I do need to take it out every month, and every quarter is too long. Like, there might be a few things where, like, I need to do this monthly, or like confession. Like, I do first Saturday, you go to confession. That's not really a to-do list, but it's like, I want to, every month, I want to have this idea of like, I take trash, I go to confession, I do these things. That's a monthly thing. But maybe that's less of what you're talking about, because that's more of like a ritual.
There definitely is some like redundancy, like embrace redundancy. Like, so you're going to be looking at, there's some repetition of monthly things when you're looking at weekly. But I think there's first this shift of like, when we talk about reminders, we ultimately, most people are having their information come to them through things like a push notification or alarm. The consideration is flipping that and you coming to the information. So through something that's like, have you ever heard of something like a weekly review?
Sure. I don't really know what it means, but I mean, yeah.
Okay.
I've heard of it.
So something like
just looking at what the upcoming week is going to look like and then setting your days.
Yes, but then also, if you are storing information or ideas outside the calendar, they got to exist somewhere on lists. So part of a weekly review is also reviewing those lists.
Okay.
So you're definitely looking at the calendar, but you're also looking at these other kinds of lists that you're maintaining that are relevant for what you want to do within the quarter, basically. That's a simplified way of doing it.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So, but this brings up the question of like, well, what the heck's on those lists? Because there's not all lists are created equal, right?
Right.
So there's another thing that can create disorganization is a certain lack of standard in terms of how information is stated on these lists. When we are moving and doing stuff like we want to do some kind of quick, rough and dirty, get the thing out, okay?
Yeah.
But then the mistake most people make is they don't change the format from that rough, dirty, get the thing out, and when they put it on their to-do list. So then, like, have you ever had the experience of like you go to a to-do list and you're looking for clarity, but you get like uppercut by yourself with like a vague blob that like made sense in the moment, but now it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So the reverse of that is this behavior we call clarifying, and clarifying is there's a certain fixed standard questions that you pose to the thing that you wrote down that gets it to the state that it feels you want items on your to-do list. First of all, you want them to be doable. But you want it to feel just as simple as like, this will be like, I don't know, some people will get this, some people won't. But I think of like the lunchbox on my kitchen counter before I went to school. It's like there. Maybe I just had an awesome mom. But it's like you pick it up and you go, right? We want our to-do list when we're in the middle of motion during the week. We want to look at a thing and receive marching orders from ourselves back to ourselves and simply execute.
Yeah.
We don't want to have to think like, well, what does this mean? Like, oh, is that actually a priority now? So all that comes back to this behavior of clarifying. And there's probably another thing that you also feel, which is like you go to a to-do list and you see a mixture of both relevant information and irrelevant information.
Yep.
And we're not talking about like high quality versus low quality, like clarity or not. It's just like, I don't need to be reminded of that right now. I need to be reminded of these kinds of things.
Yeah. Do you have a system? I've tried different things, and I feel like I the way that my brain works. So I think this, I'm sure you've both experienced this, but at least for me, my wife will kind of just put everything that needs to be done on a list. Sometimes she'll prioritize it, but it's just everything, right? And for me, I prioritize it by like, I'll do like, okay, house. Here's what needs done at the house. I need to do this in a month, and then I'll try to organize it. But like these are like almost like to do soon. Like I need to do this today or tomorrow. And then there's like, rent needs to be paid at the end of the month, or like the water filter needs change in 6 months. And it's kind of like a house. So there's a category, and then there's a timeline, and its priority. The top is most relevant down to least relevant, but still relevant. And then you go to like job, other interests, the podcast, because if I just say all of these things that I need done and they're unrelated, then I can't prioritize. So what I do is, okay, I'm kind of in the mood to think about the podcast. All right, what am I looking at? All right, so who's coming on in the next month? All right, here are the 4 names. Let's do some research. Let's start typing up their bios, whatever I need to do. That's 10 minutes. Okay, great. Put that on hold. And then I can literally, and this is, I think, a superpower of men in many ways, I can literally completely disconnect, do not care, and I'll go to work, or I'll go to the store. I'll do something different.
As
and
long
I can
as
totally
you trust
disconnect.
that you're going to come back to that list.
And I think true. And that's why you have to know where you left off. And that's why I try to keep good notes about like, okay, I did this research on this guest, but I didn't do X, Y, and Z. So follow up.
Yes. I mentioned that because that's one of the things that keep something cycling in the mind. You can even write it out, but it'll still cycle if another part of you knows that you're not actually confident you're going to come back to the thing.
Yep.
Right?
Right,
The thing
right.
that you're talking about, we call that modes.
Okay.
Modes are grouping. Most people kind of adopted like the Covey planner kind of thing, and they're arranging their actions according first and foremost by time. And the consideration is to not do that. Time is important, and there's a place for putting stuff on the calendar, but there's a lot of things that you want to organize according to the context in which you would do it, the practical state in which you're doing things rather than the time. So yeah, we call those modes. We use grocery lists as the image for this. So like, no one goes to a grocery list and their grocery list is like cake, icing, flour, ice cream, fruit, milk. Okay. And then the other item on their grocery list is lasagna, noodles, meat, pasta, whatever. Like, no one does that. What do? They group this stuff according to where the things are in the grocery store, not according to the outcome that they're being used for.
Right.
But the equivalent is most people are arranging their actions by their projects rather than by the mode in which they would be done.
So I'm doing it wrong. Got it.
No. What you're the question is, no, a lot of what you just said sounds right.
Honestly,
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it looks like, but
that's actually really funny that you bring that up, because the last grocery store list that my wife and I wrote up, we were literally like,
it was by meal.
Literally it was like, okay, this is the meal, but
how pleasant was that experience?
we forgot things.
Right. Exactly.
It is totally something, because you're in an aisle, you're like, all right, I'm going to do this thing. Okay, I'm going to go to that aisle, go to this. And then you're like on the other side of the store, you're like,
right, you got to circle back.
Dang it, I got to go get the pork for that other thing. So you're like, have to circle. And then because of that, you have
life hack, just order online. It's all there. You just pick it up. It's great. It's free.
So true. But no, that's really interesting that you bring that up, because I literally, like, that's so practical.
Have you ever used the app Trello?
I have, yeah.
Trello. I would like to use it more.
Can you explain?
When I did use it, it was really interesting. So,
sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to explain it.
Cool.
And the way that I used it, and I kind of stopped, I don't know if there was a subscription or why I stopped using it, but I kind of want to get back into it now that I'm thinking about it. So what you do is you create, I'm forgetting all the terminology, but I think you create a branch.
Okay.
So you make columns, and you can organize it in different ways. And there's different systems. There's a more professional one, and I forget what it's called, but it's for project management. And you can basically put like so-and-so, like you enter a job name and you enter all the different steps that need to be done with the timeline. And then you can do all these different jobs. So then what you can do as a project manager is you can click on the job and say, okay, drywall is supposed to take 3 weeks. But then in the moment, if you realize, oh, drywall is going to take 6 weeks, you can push the drywall out to 6 weeks and everything else will reorganize after that. So then you're like, oh, there's a delay. Now the electrical install is being pushed till whatever day. Let the electricians know, let the homeowner know. And so it pushes everything. And so you don't have to go back through and reorganize it. It's you set these kind of guidelines. And then as you adjust things, it kind of adjusts accordingly, and then you're like, oh, okay, I guess it was pushed out 2 weeks. I'll let everyone know, but you don't have to manually push it out. It kind of the way that you program it works like that.
Sure.
Trello is kind of a dumbed down version of that, but the way that you can organize it, it's really cool. And this worked really great for my brain, is that you're like, you can you create like a box, and then you add tasks in the box, and you can prioritize them, and then you can also archive things. So you can like create a whole list. So like, for example, I had one, and it was like Christmas gift ideas. And every time I would think of a Christmas gift idea for someone, I'd be like, oh, open it up, Dad, so-and-so, whatever it was, and then archive it. So it's not on the home screen. It's not taking up room, but I know it's in there, because then if I have a Christmas gift idea, I can open it up, add it, and then archive it so that it's not cluttering, and I know it's there, and I can just totally forget about it. But then when Christmas, it's October, November, I pull it up, boom, I have all these Christmas ideas, and then I can go.
Yeah.
And so you could do that with multiple things. So that I'm like, okay, house, job, podcast, I don't know, you break vehicles, and you can break it down into things, and you can add photos, you can add links, And so for like my cars, it'd be like oil change, and I would put get oil change on whatever day, add a calendar reminder, and then take a picture of whatever I needed to take a picture of, so then I could pull up the details on my car or pull up the details and whatever. So it's like rather than having a calendar reminder of get your oil change and then you just keep pushing it out because you're busy, you have all this information, and you could and I think you can also share it, so you can make it collaborative with someone and they can see all the things you're going through. It's kind of interesting, and it doesn't work with everyone's brain, but I remember when I used it, I was like, that's great, because I'll like have an idea or like, oh, I need to do that, but it's not enough to put it on the calendar. I just kind of want it written down. And so I would put it in there. And that way, when I went into podcast, I'd be like, oh, right, we need to record a professional intro, or we need to update our music, or we need to whatever. But it's not a priority where it needs to be on the calendar, because if it's on the calendar, I'm just going to keep pushing it because I don't have time. Right. But when we sit down as a group, then I can say, all right, this is the goals for 2025. We want to do X, Y, and Z. And it's all there.
Yeah, a big principle for organization is what David Allen calls putting the thing in front of the door. So, like, you remember, like, oh, I need to bring this thing to the office tomorrow, right? And so you take the thing and you put it in front of the door. It's a much more elegant form of reminding yourself than setting an alarm, because setting an alarm is dependent on, like, you got to guess that time perfectly. And if it goes off, like and you're not ready, you got to reswipe it. We're putting something in front of the doors. Like, you literally are going to be reminded at the exact right time, and you didn't have any extra effort of figuring out when that time is. So a big piece of organization is figuring out, like, what are the kinds of doors in your life that you are regularly walking past, and then how can you organize information, actionable information, according to those doors, so that it's not taking up a bunch of space, in the head.
Yeah. I also wonder if some of it, I do think it's helpful if you have these ideas or dreams and whatever, and you want to write them down and record them and keep track of them. Like, I think that is a good thing. I also wonder if there's maybe a merit to simplifying things and being like, okay, yes, in 5 years, I'd like to work for X company, making X salary, living in whatever city.
Yeah.
So sure, I'll write that down in kind of like the dream category. Yeah. But this isn't something that I need to be thinking about tomorrow, the next week, or 6 months from now. So like, why overcomplicate my life with a reminder to pursue this career? It's like, no, I can't do anything about that right now. Like, kind of being realistic about where you're going to be. And I think that is helpful if you're married, to sit down with your spouse, or if you're single, to just have a realistic conversation about at least the next 6 months, maybe not a year, maybe not 10 years, but like, where do I want to be in 6 months? Like, I want to have more money. I want to have less debt. I want to have, like, just general goals. Okay, now how am I going to get there? And that way, going forward every day, we're trying to save money. We're trying to work towards this. We're trying to, like, you'd be surprised if you listen to like the Ramsey Show or like financial podcasts. You'd be surprised like how quickly people can dig themselves out of like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt if they're like, no, we're literally eating beans and rice for the next year, and every cent we get is going to pay this off because this sucks. We're not going to be in medical debt for this long. Like, we're going to pay this off. We're going to sell our stuff. We're both working overtime and delivering pizzas. Like, people very quickly will get to where they want to be if they're aligned on that goal.
I have a quick question about kind of the doors. Like, what does that look like? Because I totally can see, and
I get the literal
right.
door.
Like, I do this all the time. Like, it's like, okay, I want my hat.
Leave your keys.
No, literally. Yes. And so, but like with other things in your life, like
yep.
Like, how do you make that?
So
door?
part of it is learning to recognize patterns in your life. So like, here's a pattern. For example, it's like, like, what kind of work do you do? Like, what profession? What's your profession?
It's insurance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, are there, what's a normal, do you have meetings during a normal week for that? Or is it not?
No, but I mean, for me in particular, it would be like scheduling things. So I'm pretty much always scheduling things for other people. So like scheduling inspections for claims that have already happened.
Okay. So, the key word is recurring.
Right.
So if you are regularly recurring, or certain situations are recurring, those tend to be high candidates for what we're calling doors or modes.
Okay.
A classic example would be like a staff meeting, or like if you're part of a team and you regularly have a one-to-one with somebody. The way you turn that into a door is, instead of having one to-do list, and on that one to-do list you're like, finish project report, pick up milk at the grocery store, tell Sarah blank. Well, if you regularly have a one-to-one with Sarah, you should have one dedicated list called When with Sarah. And that's a door that you can put stuff in front of, so that when you're with her, you pull that list up.
Okay. And is that like practically as in writing it down? I mean, I guess it could be, but are you thinking more of like in your head?
No, writing it down.
Writing it down.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because again, like this gets to the point of like, we're in the information age, not the agricultural age. So like before, a lot of the reminders were baked into the physical environment, right? Sure. That is no longer the case anymore. So we need to like bring them back into the physical environment, which is through writing.
Okay.
One of the biggest things that I've seen that's really helpful, and I don't know if this might be overwhelming to people, but having like if you integrate your Google Calendar, if you have like a work calendar and a home count. So I have like a personal email, I have a work email, and then I have a shared email that Kathleen and I have. And so like if it's an event for me or a reminder for me, I just put it on my calendar. No one else sees it. It's just for me. If it's a work thing, I put it on my work calendar so that people know that I'm out of the office that day. I know that I'm out of the office. But Kathleen doesn't see that. And then if it's a thing for us, then I put it on our calendar. So it is kind of a lot of thinking about who needs to see this, which is a lot. Like it is a lot sometimes, but it is nice because I'm like, oh, well, I don't need to have 10 things to do and have Brian see it or have Kathleen see this. Yeah. But if it is a thing that we are supposed to do as a couple or we are doing as friends, like when I book the podcast interview, I add him as a guest so he knows that it's happening. I don't put Kathleen on there. I just put a little reminder podcast tonight. Right. So she knows it's happening, but she doesn't know who is coming on. She doesn't know what time. Like, I don't need to give her the details. And if she asks, I'll give her the details. But I try to keep it as simple for everyone involved as possible. And then I can also just look at my week and be like, all right, take out everything. What's personal life look like? Okay, add work. Okay, add extra things. And then I'm like, oh, okay, that's the picture of my week.
So the same thing, that same dynamic applies within our own self. Like there's certain times when we don't need all the details about this thing, but then later on we do need the details about that thing. Yeah. So it's arranging it in that way. We've kind of played around and poked with a couple things. So now like we have the context, I'll just go through those behaviors and then now we kind of know what they are. So the first thing is like whenever we're going through a day, like we're making choices, right? One thing that's very helpful is to realize that we only have 3 choices. We're choosing between planned work, planning work, or unplanned work. That is planned work, planning work, or unplanned work. Planned work is like you can think right now as the stuff that's on your to-do list or on your calendar or whatever.
Like a scheduled meeting or something like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Planning work is turning the thing from an idea that you scribbled down on a piece of paper to like an actual plan. Okay. So like, well, what would be the next step for this? Or like, what am I trying to do by pursuing this or whatever? Okay. Unplanned work is all the unpredictable stuff, right? So right off of the bat, just knowing that you have those 3 types simplifies things a lot. And immediately, very common when people hear that breakdown, they immediately see like, I'm like doing way too much of the unplanned stuff and I'm basically never doing planning stuff. It's going to go different for temperaments. Like some people are inclined towards the planning, right? And they actually get more organized by doing more unplanned. Where someone might be defaulting to unplanned for their temperament and they get more organized by doing more planning work, right? But that's ultimately what you're choosing at any given moment. Now, how do you choose that? Well, you're going to use 3 things in harmony with each other. We call it the 3 things to use to choose. It's your reason, your intuition, and your lists. By reason, we mean you're like slower, more analytical, strategic thinking. Your intuition is that fast gut sense. And then your lists are the things that we've been talking about, like the doors and then your calendar or any kind of externalized information.
Okay.
So someone who is experiencing a lot of like nagging anxiety throughout the day, there's something off in those three things. They're mischoosing between those three types of work because there's not an alignment between their reason, their intuition, and their list. So usually hyperextended in one and atrophied in another. So they could be super intuitive, but they never actually come back and look at a list, or they could be way too much of a planner and they're like always in their list and they're not using their intuition enough, right? So then the question becomes like, well, like, how did we even get stuff on the list? What do those lists look like? And also, how do we keep those three things in alignment, the reason, intuition, and list? So, but that whole dynamic right there, that is called moving. That's a behavior of moving. Moving is naturally choosing between those three types of work. Okay. Planned work, planning work, and unplanned work. So things get on your list because you're noting them. Noting is another one of our behaviors. It's recognizing and then collecting. So that is training yourself to change how you interpret the sensation of an open loop, to realize that it's actually a very sophisticated self-reminder of a thing that you want to know. And then developing the muscle memory of when you feel that open loop, develop the habit of externalizing it in some fashion such that's not going to get lost. It's going to actually come back to one consolidated place. That's what we call noting. Now, you would go crazy if you tried to figure something out the minute you had the idea of it. It'd be very impractical because, like we were saying, most of the ideas come up in the shower or when you're on a walk or whatever. So then it's usually a different time when you actually sit down and you're like, well, wait, like, is this even a good idea? Okay, It's a good idea. Well, what does it mean? Like, what am I going to do with it? That whole dynamic is what we call clarifying. Clarifying is all about defining what the thing is and then deciding what you're going to do about it. Okay. The good news is that there's a fixed set of questions that you can use on anything, whether it's an idea or an emotion or a thought that sort of like stuck out when you were reading a book. There's a fixed set of questions that you can work the thing through in order to clarify it. That's outside the scope of this, but it's defining the thing and then deciding what you're going to do about it. And then there's the reviewing. Reviewing is rhythmically re-engaging with those lists. So most people have a very sporadic relationship with the stuff that they write down. They either like write it and never come back to it, or they write it and sporadically come back to it, usually when they're really stressed out and overwhelmed. But the idea is if you developed a rhythm in which you would come back to certain things, and there's different rhythms, there's essentially three core ones that you come back to this information, you start to develop a familiarity with it. And once you start developing this familiarity, you can be a lot more intuitive with it. Like you can go from your gut, which usually means you can be a lot more fast and dynamic throughout the week because you have this one fixed time when you come back, things slow down and you're looking back through the notes, you're looking back through the calendar. And that's the behavior of reviewing. So it's moving, noting, clarifying, and reviewing.
Do you think that, I guess it might depend on what you're doing. Like obviously businesses will have like a weekly meeting.
Yeah. So,
you okay?
Yeah.
You just have your earphones really hard.
Yeah.
That's fine. It looks great.
No, my ears are hurting. I don't know why.
I think as a business, like, it seems like a lot of businesses generally meet either too often or never enough. Like there's businesses where it's like, I don't even know my coworkers. We never meet. I don't know what's going on. I'm kind of doing my little piece of the pie, but I don't really know what's going on at large.
Yep.
Or there's companies that meet 2 or 3 times a week and you're like, gee whiz, like there's nothing new to talk about. Like, of course we know what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if that's true. Like, so I think there's a balance, obviously a balance you need to strike, but I wonder if it seems like with a business, I guess it probably is contingent on the vision of the business, but like how often you need to meet depends on how complex your vision is and how often things are changing. If you're a reporter, well, the news is changing every day, so you might need a daily debrief. Or military, you need a daily debrief on what's going on. But if you're just like, a public adjusting company or you're a media company, well, you probably can meet once a week and be fine. You have the plan for the week, and if things change, you can text about it. You don't need like an official meeting.
Yeah.
So with these principles that you've been outlining, are these specifically for business, or are these also personal? Like,
nice.
Like it's good to sit with your wife or with your spouse respectively a certain amount of time for a certain period of time. So like maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly, but you need to sit down and say, what does the next week look like? Or what does the next year look like? It's something I was listening to a few days ago. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. John Deloney. He works for the Ramsey Network, but he's an expert on like trauma counseling, and now he does a lot of like anxiety counseling and stuff like that, but live primarily. People call in and say, hey, my husband cheated on me and now I don't know what to do, and then he kind of walks them through how to get through that. And it's not long format, so it's a little bit of a different environment, but he's really fascinating. And one thing he talks about is like being able to recognize, particularly with your family, is being able to recognize seasons. So not just, hey, it's a busy year yet again. It's like, no, this is a different season. Like for him, he was like, I'm publishing a book, I'm touring, we're expecting, our fourth kid. So you know what? Christmas, we're doing it at home this year, and we're going to email the family. We're going to be upfront. But we're recognizing that this is a busier season. It's not every year. We're not saying that this is the precedent. We're just saying right now, it's not a good time. And we have that vision that it's just, we're not going to want to travel. It's going to be too much. We're going to let everyone know. Next year, hey, the book is published. The kid has already won. It's a great time to travel, and we have some extra money. Now we're going to go. And I wonder if that's less true with business, but it seems like it's probably true with family, where you have to kind of recognize, like, are we in a busy season, a stressful season, a transition season, or is this like, we're having people over, we're traveling, we're doing stuff.
Yep.
And I think that spouses maybe are on different pages about that a lot of times, like about where they're at. And if you can align on that, that reduces a lot of the to-do lists or stress.
Yeah. So there's the, like, how do you get aligned? How does one know when a season has changed? And then also, where are these behaviors applied? Work or personal life or whatever. Okay. So how do you stay aligned? Well, that kind of ties back in with that last one, which is like, the behaviors are meant to be applied throughout your whole life. Like, not like just like time wise, but all areas of your life. When we talk about organizing your life, we mean your whole life. So most people, they either they're winging it both at work and at home, or they've got some kind of fancy, complicated system for work, and then they're winging it at home. Few people have a method that's simple enough to be able to be used in both contexts.
Yeah.
And most of those complicated systems, they can't handle the complexity of family life. Family life is way more dynamic and fluid, and that doesn't mean that you don't organize it. It just means you need a system that can actually flow with that. So that's part of what's so great about the behavior approach, is that it's like having the simple machines of attention and flow. It's like the screw, the wedge, and the wheel. It's like you can apply them in a million different ways, right? It's a lot more adaptable. But yeah, a very helpful thing for a married couple would be to decide to make a clear intention and decide when they're going to meet once a week to get synced up with each other. And now, depending on where they're coming from, they might hear that and be like, oh, we're too busy, when are we going to do it? My favorite example for this is this is an actual real story. I won't put the names in here, but two friends, they were engaged with each other, and during their engagement period, there was some tension, because whenever they'd hang out, they would talk about wedding planning. And so one of the
I don't think that's exclusive just to them.
Right.
One of the parties said, I wish there was just one night when we didn't talk about the wedding. Right.
I'm not going to say it was the guy, but I kind of feel like it was the guy.
He actually wasn't in this situation. Because the guy responded, I wish there was only one night when we did talk about the wedding.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Right? Because those are the options. You can like half talk about it all the time, or you can really talk about it one time.
Yeah.
Right. So the counterintuitive thing is like you're not becoming a weird corporate business organization to have an intentional meeting once a week.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're allowing yourself to actually hang out with each other all those other times because things aren't on fire. But so pair that with the door principle. If each spouse maintained a list called with spouse, and when they had an idea, they didn't just run to the other person and just like vomit it on them, but they wrote it on a list. And if they also didn't just like bring that raw form list, but before they went into that meeting, they actually looked at the things on that list and clarified what question do I actually have here, or what's the next thing for us to do about that. Think how much smoother that meeting would be. And something that's smooth is a lot easier to maintain consistently over and over again. Right.
Yeah. I remember Jordan Peterson talking about, I think when him and his wife were struggling with, like they both, I mean, she was about to die and then was healed, and he was also not doing well, and his daughter was not doing well. And the way that they got through it, partially was, he said they would get together once a week and just talk about like whatever. Like they had some specific things, and some of it was, where are we going tomorrow, and what are we doing the next week, and but also more long-term things like do we have a will in place, where are we getting buried, like more long-term things. And when I heard that, it kind of sounded weird because the way he phrased it was like we would get together, we would listen to music, we would have a dinner, we would have some drinks, we would hang out, and I was like, that just sounds kind of weird. Like, especially like if you're going out on the town and doing that, that's one thing, but it was all at home. Maybe it was because it was COVID or something, but the more I thought about it, I was like, no, I think that is, now maybe you need to have the separation and go out and do something and have a babysitter or something. But I was like, I think that must be how you need to do it, because otherwise,
you definitely make it fun. Like you get a fun snack or like a beer or something.
You have to make it fun, but you also, I think the big thing, when Dr. Cutterback came on, we were talking about intentionality, and he was like, if you're worried about your teenagers having a phone too young, or if you're worried about your son dating someone too young, it's like, you can worry about it, or you can just make a rule. Like what's the intentionality? Like, what are you worried about? What's the conversation you need to have? The same thing with your spouse. Like, do you want to talk to them about a problem, or do you just want to be perpetually worried about it? So be intentional.
The person who perpetually worries is a person that's not recognizing. And then the person who makes the plan is the one who recognizes.
Yeah. That's actually, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how this works across the board, but I think that I would much rather say, like, once a week, not to say, oh, don't talk to me about that, that's for Tuesday, but like, generally speaking, long-term things, short-term things, problems we need to solve, I would almost rather sit down and be like, all right, there's 15 bullet points. Are we going to my family or your family for Christmas? Yes or no? Yes, we're going to your family. We need tickets. Okay, let's save up for that. Next bullet point.
Yeah.
Who's going to the store on Wednesday? Is it me or you? Me? Okay, put it on the calendar. Like, and it seems kind of silly, but it's like, if you lay all that stuff out, then we don't have to worry about it. Like, let's just figure it out, because both of us want to work towards this goal.
Yeah.
So what's best for you? Like, how can I best help you? How can you best help me? What's the mutual kind of meeting ground here? I think, unfortunately, like 75% of it you can do in a meeting, like officially once a week, and the other 25% there's no way you can schedule, and it just happens.
Right.
So you kind of have to be able to be flexible. But
No, sorry.
Sounded like you had a really good point.
Well, just something that has been running through my mind. Obviously, most of this is like, okay, so I can get stuff done, and then also I can make a plan with other people, and then I can make a plan with like people at work, or like I can make a plan for this month, for next month, for whatever.
Yeah.
It just reminded me of, and what we talked about before about, this does tie in, I promise, but like with the desires and like knowing knowing that God puts the pretty much works through our desires. And I learned that was an Ignatian thing, and Saint Ignatius, every day had the examine, So like each day you kind of go through your day.
Yeah.
It just seemed, sorry, that was a long-winded thing to say that most of this really just seems like it's just going to like, okay, you have to be thinking about what's going on in your day, and then you should be coming back to what's going on in your day and being like, okay, I should have done that better, or I can plan this better, or I can plan that, so I need to do that in the future. It just seems like it's very much like, okay, I can apply this to myself today, and then I can apply this to myself for the week, but I can also apply this to both of us for the week. And then kind of, it just seems like if you get it foundationally, you can keep going up and with everyone else. So
Totally. Well, so like there's a couple of things here. It's like, how do we stay simple? Because you can over collect.
Totally.
Right. Like you can hoard ideas, right? So a thing that safeguards against that is being really in touch with who you are. Like, what is your essence? What are your unique gifts? Like, and what are the deepest, corest desires that you have? Because if you're really close in touch with that, that makes it a lot easier to say no to things that are outside of that scope, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy how powerful saying no is?
Yes.
I don't do it a lot.
Really. I know.
But yeah, it just kind of struck me a few weeks ago where it's like, if you're just really brutally honest,
Right.
it might seem rude the first couple times, but I realized like there's so much fake energy.
Yes.
Like, okay, so here's the scenario.
Yes.
Someone you went to college with, you're not super close with them, but cool guy, like couldn't say anything bad about him, says, hey, you and your wife should come over, we'll have dinner, whatever.
Right.
You could say, okay, I guess we'll cancel those plans, and we were going to, do this thing at home, but we'll reschedule.
Right.
Or I can just say, no thanks. Thanks for the invite, though.
Right.
It's like, worst case scenario, he's a super offended and never invites us again. Okay, well, that's kind of an overreaction. And if that's his reaction to me saying no, I don't really want to hang out with him. Most likely, he's just going to say, okay, cool. But there's always this desire to be like, man, I really wish I could, but my wife said this. Like, there's like kind of this blame game. You have to, you feel like you have to come up with an excuse or like, we're whatever. And it's like, no, I can just say no. Like I don't care. Like
and be at peace with that if it's a contextualized decision. But most people, the thing comes up, they're only looking at that. They're not saying if I say yes to that, I'm saying no to these other things. Right.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to have that context if you don't externalize this stuff so that you can actually see it. And if you don't regularly come back and look at it again. And build that familiarity with it so that every time you're saying yes, you're saying no, and every time you're saying no, you're saying yes.
Well, and I think if you have your priorities in line, you should be able to obviously there's so much prudence that goes into all this stuff, but like I've had a few scenarios where I'm like, I've agreed to do this thing, then this other thing comes up and I should stick with the first thing, but like the first thing that I agreed to is like going out to get a beer with this person I don't really know that well, but I said yes because I didn't have a reason to say no. And then like one of my close friends is getting married that day, and it's like, well, should I go to that thing that I originally agreed to and like have the integrity? I could do that. Or I could also say, hey, really sorry, my best friend's getting married. I have to go to this, but we can reschedule. It's like, no, like there are some times where you need to kind of back down from what you agreed to because there's something that takes priority. You can't just like always stick with what you agreed to.
What's on the calendar,
With what's on the calendar. So I think I don't know what virtue this is, but I think there's kind of a virtue of like being rigorous with what you planned to a certain point, but then also being flexible. And this, I'm sure like both of you have experienced this where it's like, I made these plans and this is the plan and I'm not deviating from the plan. And then you're like, oh, my wife needs this thing and I have to go to the store. And so I guess I'm canceling that thing. Or it's not always, it's not even her all the time. Like sometimes it's me, like I have to work late. So yes, I did say that I'd be home by this time, but I do have to work late. That's not the plan, but I do need to be flexible.
This is why,
and that's just what you have to do sometimes.
This is why a comprehensive method needs to account for unplanned work.
How do you do that though?
Like, what does that look like?
Do you like time box like work time, and then you have a few hours where you're like
unplanned work?
Yeah, like do you plan that? because I know that some people do that. Like I know Elon Musk pretty famously he does, I think it's called time boxing, and he'll be like, I've got from 8 to 10 there's this thing, and from 10 to noon there's this thing, and from 1 to 3 is free time. And that can be a nap, that can be video games, or that could be, okay, I have these 3 things I need to do and I'm going to do them right now. But he'll like create time that he can just do whatever.
Yeah.
Like, is that what you do? Like you
don't think
time book?
I don't think that's the primary thing. I think the primary thing is being in touch with what your planned work is.
Okay.
And then if you are really in touch with that, then at the moment you can make an informed decision of what the trade-off is. But the problem is most people are not in touch with what their planned work is. So when an unplanned thing comes up, they just have this like vague sense of like, I think I'm not missing something by saying yes to this. So yeah, I'll say to this.
Like tentatively yes.
Yeah, or they'll overreact and overestimate what their planned work is and just like, no, I can't do anything. I'm super busy right now, right? And then they become too rigid, right? So it's much more about staying in touch with what that planned work is.
Yeah.
Which is coming back to that behavior of reviewing, but also it also depends on that the stuff that you are reviewing is clear, which is the clarifying. There's 2 other like things a couple steps back. One is like, so for a married couple, right? Like how do they know what season they're in? So part of the reason why it's so helpful to have that weekly cadence is that weekly meeting serves as mile markers. It's like if you looked out like Leech Run, right? Like those little mile markers that are on there, they give you a sense of time. If they weren't there, you'd be way more disoriented in terms of like, well, how far is that distance compared to here? If there's no rhythm, it's really hard to tell like when a season has changed or when we want to next change a season. Like you don't have any sense of where you're at. So that's just connecting the weekly rhythm with the seasonal rhythm. And then lastly, it's like, where do we apply these behaviors? Okay. So one way to answer that is, well, apply them in both your work and your personal life. But there's also another dimension of like apply them to all dimensions of the person, not just like where the person is living or working, but all dimensions of the person. So we talk about the head, the hands, and the heart. So by and large, what we've been talking about so far when we've been talking about organization is more the hands. The hands is like time and to-dos, like organizing your time and to-dos, right? But there's also these 2 other areas of application. One is the head. This is like what you might think or map onto the intellect, but it's more like about organizing your knowledge. So like when you read a book and it jumps out at you, like what do you do with that? Like, do you just kind of be like, man, that's interesting, and then like keep moving on? If you do, like you're not coming back to that thing, right? So then what do? Do you highlight it? And then if you highlight it, like, do you come back to those highlights? There's a whole method of learning how to garden your own knowledge and basically taking insight from either yourself or from books and bringing that into a centralized place and letting those ideas speak to each other, because you're no longer having to hold all of that in your head, but now it's extended out so you can see the things and build, basically build a web of stuff. So that's the head area. And then there's also the heart, which is the area of emotions and mindset. You were mentioning a couple different things, therapy, and then the other podcast.
That was a while ago.
Few people recognize that emotions are able to be organized. Like that just seems like a weird 2 different worlds. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, you think of emotions and you think of disorganization.
Right, exactly.
I think of unplanned work.
Unplanned work, right. Emotions are meant to, in one sense, like animate action. Like they're supposed to be energy that moves, and we're moved to take action, right? So it's outside the scope of this podcast, but we do a really big deep dive if the listeners are interested. If you guys have heard of Monk Manual with Stephen Lawson, he's got a podcast called Potency. and him and I did a 3-part series. It's like very, very, very in depth, all on the area of the heart. So like, how do you organize emotions, and what exactly does that process look like? We actually do that kind of work live on his show in both negative and positive emotions. So that could be of interest.
Interesting.
Yeah. I do have a question about the head. So you were talking about the head and organizing. So like reading, and then like, do I highlight? Do I like write it down?
Yeah.
When you were talking about having it all in a certain place, my first thought was like, man, that's a really big note. Like in Apple phones, like iPhones, like you have a note and you're like just book thoughts, and you're just like right kind of thing. So what is that like practically?
That's why we've talked about Substack, right? Where it's like, if you're passionate about this thing, we could record an episode. We could find someone who's an expert on this and record it, and you can kind of like get it out. But if you're like, oh man, I really want to talk about, I don't know, the Easter Vigil and why that's so important, or talk about this particular podcast or this book, you could have someone on to talk about it. You could write it down and text it to yourself, or you could sit down for a couple hours and write a little essay on why you think X is important and why people should do Y, or why should they check it out, and then put it there, and then either post it or at least have it archived. And so then you can return to that and you're like, I actually did that. I feel like we probably both did this unintentionally in college, where it's like I was assigned to write this paper, and then I had some flexibility, and so I took this take on it, and now after the fact, like I want to refer back to that on the sacraments or on your thesis, and it's like I was kind of forced to do it, but then when I was forced to do it, I made it my own, and now I'm like sort of ashamed, but also sort of proud of I did this 30-page document on architecture. Like I wrote my thesis on that. It's not great, but it's like, but I put a lot of time and effort into it, and like I can refer to that. It's a thing that I did, not just a thought that I had, but I actually put it into writing, had it multiple edits.
Yes.
And it's a thing.
So this is a key principle, and also like it's helping tie back this theme of organization as more of use rather than place.
Okay.
Because it's like you got your hands dirty on that thing, right? So like you now just know where that information is in that thesis, right? Because you actually worked with it. So like a key, there's a couple key principles in terms of organizing knowledge. One of them is regular use. Like I don't care how fancy your system is, if you're always just inputting stuff into it and are not using it for any kind of creative purposes.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not real knowledge. It hasn't been assimilated.
Right.
Another thing is if you're talking like Apple Notes, like it's a rough and dirty way. So eventually it breaks down, but it's enough to get started, which is the rule of 100. It's not, we just made it up, but it's very practical. So don't worry about any organization. Just make 100 points in that one note. Okay. And they're bullet points, right? Once you get to 100, then, on a weekend, sit there, and if some people do this on note cards, some people are doing it in Apple Notes, but do the equivalent of like looking up at those 100 things. Like, what are the patterns here? Like, what kind of clusters do I naturally find? And then let those clusters be their own notes. Okay. So you look at 100 points and you're like, well, like, I don't know, like 20 of these are kind of like around metaphysics, and like another is about this other question about free will and this. Like, let your organization of your knowledge be a very bottom up thing. Like one of the things that kills it is just like a top down, like trying to think of what your abstract categories are, and then structure without any kind of use case will just suck the life out of it.
Right.
There was some other thing. I'm blanking on it, but a fantastic book. Number one recommended book on this is The Intellectual Life by Sertiage, French Dominican, little red book. That book is dynamite, so rich. You've read it before. You're familiar with it.
I've just heard it.
Yeah,
it
referenced many times.
Absolute must read.
The Intellectual Life. Let's go.
Why is that? Why is it a must read?
It is just profoundly rich. Like it is one of the richest books I've ever read, and it lays out all the key principles for managing knowledge. There's a whole like kind of like theology around it that's in that book. It's filled with wisdom because there's so many elements where, especially as we're in a place where like we have more fancy tools, there's this, it's very easy to get lost in a million bazillion different ways you can quote unquote organize information. Right. And there's really wise advice from him on how to like temper curiosity, for example, or the importance of reading, being selective in your reading, but then also being broadly. He's wonderful at making images. Like he'll say like, okay, if you, the deeper you want to go, the wider you need to create the whole. And by that, he means like, if you want to make something, if you want to produce something really substantial, like you can't just read only within that field. You need to read outside the field to sort of balance your mind. And that's going to allow you to think a lot deeper, right? So like it's just filled with images like that. Or like he says, like when you're reading a book, the one who is intellectually virtuous, their experience of reading a book is the experience of someone being on the platform of a train station, and the train pulls up and the doors open up and a flood of people come out, but they're not getting overwhelmed by all the floods of people. They're looking for their two friends, right? And they're on the lookout, and then when they find them, cool, they look in. And a mistake that someone can make when they're reading a book is like they just get sucked into anything and everything that's interesting. And but if they're actually in touch with like their core interests, like everyone's got about like 7 or 8 like deep questions that they regularly ruminate on over and over and over again. If you're really in touch with that and you're reading with the lens of expecting things that either challenge or confirm questions that you're wrestling with, it's a very different reading experience. So it gets into all of that. It's a beautiful book.
Man, that's super interesting.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, but maybe before we close, could you just give us a quick overview of what you're doing with Heal? Like we've talked about, being organized, being yourself. I guess we haven't talked about becoming like God as much, but like what does that look like for you day to day? Like, do you have clients that you're just being paid to give counsel to? Are you like doing speaking things? Like what does that look like for you? And then maybe what's the trajectory of the company? Where are you trying to take it?
That's a good question. I'll answer the first one first. So there's two main forms of work that I do in terms of helping people. Both of them still have the same goal. So like when someone works with me, the whole focus is that person being God in the world by being themselves through the art of organization. So there's that specific intention, right? That there's an understanding of why are we getting organized in the first place? Who are we organizing, and why are we doing that? Everything else flows from there. Now, at that point, it's either someone is doing something more of like a self-study. So we run ongoing programming every month that basically is like taking different elements of this. Like you could spend a whole month on clarifying, right? You could spend a whole month on knowledge gardening, which is that head aspect of Heal. You could spend a whole month on how to heal emotions, right? So we have a body of knowledge that details the behaviors and also how to like implement them in your life. And then we also do, we rotate our focus and then do live programming on that. So that's kind of like a wider scope, a more do-it-yourself approach. So that's one form of work that I do. The other form of work is I work with about 10 to 15 people a year. And with those individuals, we go very, very, very deep. I work with them for an entire year. We do one-to-one coaching, and we go into all areas of their life, their emotions, their intellectual interests, their work, both personal and professional. And what that looks like is them learning how to turn those 4 behaviors into just instinct. It's not something that they think about anymore. So that, organization doesn't become this techie thing that you nerd out about. It's just, you're just living your life again.
Right.
So yeah, and then, on the side, I'm always writing and speaking and whatnot, to bump into new people. But yeah, does that answer your question?
I think so. Where do you want it to go? Like, do you want to just keep doing what you're doing? Do you want to get more clients? Do you want to
okay, I can
launch
answer
into
this
something
better.
else?
So I do see that, I see that there's a strong need for this, just like within the church in general, right?
Okay.
So I believe that it's supposed to grow. I myself feel called in the direction of publishing books fairly soon.
Okay.
So I think like you talked about having a 5-year vision plan or a 10-year plan. So like my 10-year plan, for example, is, and it'll start sooner than that, but 10 years from now, I should be in a cycle of researching, publishing a book, going on a tour, researching, publishing a book, going on a tour. That'll be one part of my life. The other part of my life, we're only talking professional here, is staying in close relationship with our top practitioners. So when people come through our 1-year program, about maybe, let's say 10 people do that program, about 3 of those 10 are really, really dialed in. Not that the others aren't, it's more like the use case for it. There's just something about it that they want to live in a form of communal life where they are in constant or regular contact with other people that are practicing this method, and having the accountability and the friendship to ensure that they're developing their spiritual life. So I see myself as continuing to run retreats with that group and stay in touch with them, and then also publish books and speak. So that would look like there would be other people that would be trained in coaching, and then they would be doing the 1-year programs as well. Beyond that, I got no idea.
Okay. Is there anything recently that you kind of have thought your whole life, maybe about what you're doing currently, and you're like, okay, this is 100% true, and then recently you realized that you were like totally wrong, like, and you had to do a full 180 on something? Is there anything that you thought, I 100% adhere to this, and then recently you were like, wow, that is actually super wrong, and I had a conversation and now I totally see it the other way? That's one of the questions I ask. Sometimes I ask people what's like the most recent good book they've read, but that's the other one. Like, what's something you've changed your mind on recently?
Okay.
That's significant.
So here's what comes to mind. When you are doing deep emotional work with somebody, the shift has been, it's harder to put into words like what I was believing beforehand. Let me describe the thing, and then we can go from there. There's a very subtle form of what you could call like a spiritual egoism that can enter into that dynamic, and it's a great temptation, because if you're doing that kind of work with somebody, it usually means that you are just like, you're naturally want to bond with people, you care about them, you can feel emotions, and you're sensitive to that, right? So what I would say is, when I first started, because when we were doing Art of Workflow, like, I thought we were just organizing time and to-dos, but I was open to everything. And so I'd just be in these one-to-one sessions, right? And then it was a fair number of them would end. We would have clarified something, but the person would kind of be like chuckling, a little bit embarrassed, and be like, yeah, like, sorry, you probably didn't sign up for like to be doing therapy with me or whatever. But to me, it was like there's no need to apologize. It's like, that's where there's dissonance, and we're going to go there, you know? But so, but then I started like formally studying like different ways of like how to actually help someone create emotional healing. And I would say the first year that I really started to do that in an intense way, I was tense about it. And I was attached without realizing it. I was attached to being the one that created that healing moment for them. And there's this weird paradox where it's like you need to like care about that, but then be totally detached about it. And if you're not, you can come in there and like this weird dynamic happens between the people. So I guess the way I would say that is like, when you first get into it, you get really excited because you're like, healing is actually possible, right? So, but then the subtle slip is like, I'm the healer, right? And so the 180 is I'm not the healer, even though healing is real.
Yeah, and it can be worked through you.
Yes,
it's just not contingent on you, and it's not going to happen all the time.
Right.
Yeah,
I forget their names. I think it's Gregory is one of the hosts, but there's a podcast called Restore the Glory.
It's a great name.
I don't listen to it that much, but both of them are like trauma counselors and like I think converts. And anyway, I've heard good things about it. I think Sarah listens to it sometimes. I know my wife listens to it sometimes. I think it's a little bit too emotional for me, particularly because it's two guys. Like when you have two guys talking about trauma, it's like if I went through that, that's what I would want to hear.
Yeah.
But since I wouldn't say I have a particularly traumatic anything. It's not what I need. But it is pretty interesting because they'll talk about like, okay, this is what you went through. You were molested or you were whatever your struggles are. And then here's how you're going to get through it. And here's a real life example of someone we worked with and, what to do. And here's the scripture and I think they're both Catholic and they go through that. But it kind of made me appreciate like, yeah, of course priests do this. Of course professional counselors do this. But you have a like podcast setting of two guys who are like, yeah, I did some bad stuff. Or like I saw some hard things. And then I had a client who saw even worse things. And then just talking about it. Like it's pretty cool. Like I don't know if I would do that on air of like, yeah, like just full confession. Here's what I've done, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's pretty powerful to have two different guys who are like, yeah, we're both doing well. We have good families. We're thriving, but like, we're not perfect. And then here's our recommendation for kind of turning the corner or coming full circle. And here are resources that you can use to get back to where you want to be. Yeah. No, it's interesting. Yeah, I would definitely recommend. Obviously they're Catholic. John Deloney is not Catholic. I'm not sure what he is. Some kind of like, might be evangelical or something. But like with his background in trauma, like particularly with radio calls, he'll be really good about like people will call in. He's like, hey, I just noticed that you're sounding a little this way. Are you thinking of hurting yourself? Or are you thinking of like, he'll just kind of read like, this is just audio and he'll kind of like read into their voice. This is what I'm picking up on. Hey, you said this. What do you mean by that? Or whatever in 5 to 10 minutes. And a lot of times after those calls, you're like, oh my gosh, I think that person like really turned a corner after that call. But then he's got some sit down podcasts. He had one with Peterson. He was on the Sean Ryan show, some other stuff. Just really like just practical advice. A lot of what you've been talking about, like you need human connection. Like, like if you're a guy and you're lonely, like you need to get some guy friends. You need to go watch a game. You need to like go out to breakfast with these guys once a week. Like you can't just lone wolf it all the time. You can sometimes, but you also need people you can lean on and like talk to and vent to and kind of have in your corner. And if you don't have that, like you're not going to be very well off, like you're going to have a hard time. And it's interesting too, like a lot of what we've been talking about, we haven't been talking about Catholicism specifically. It's there in the background. Yeah. Like a lot of these principles, I don't know. It's just neat to me that people who are not Catholic come to the same conclusion of like, yeah, you need community, you need friendship, like almost like borderline, you need confession. Like modern day counseling kind of is a substitute for Catholic confession. And I think Jordan Peterson and other people have talked about this, like, oh my gosh, like, you Catholics really have it figured out. Like, you literally have built into your church, like, counseling, but it's free. Like, you go, you reveal what you've done, you get forgiveness, and then you move on.
Can I tell you a very, very quick and funny story?
Yeah.
So I met a man who was a recent convert.
Okay.
And I asked him, you know, like, how's it going or whatever. And he's like, dude, I don't know what everyone's talking about, this Catholic guilt stuff. Like, I never felt less guilty my whole life. Like, because before I literally had, all I could do was just like tell myself, like, I think I'm forgiven, you know?
Yep.
But to be able to actually go to someone who's representing Christ and to say out loud and then to hear the words back, he's like, I don't know where that concept came from, because like, I only felt Catholic guilt before I was Catholic.
Yeah. No, I think it's a real thing. And I think that's part of the reason why it was instituted that way.
Right.
And I think that Protestants, unfortunately, like, they have that mentality of, I can go directly to God, I can just confess. But it's not the same. Like, it's not the same to just say, God, I did these things, I'm so sorry, please accept me. But when you go to confession and you're like, all right, I think I made a good act of contrition, I confessed everything that I could think of.
Yeah.
As far as I know, I'm forgiven. But I actually had the, like, regulatory words of absolution and a penance. It's like, it's real. Like, it's concrete in a way that it's not true otherwise. You can go to a therapist and vent all you want, but they're not going to say, oh, you're forgiven for doing these terrible things. They're just going to write that down and say, okay, we'll see you next week. It's $500, you know? Like, it's not, and I'm not saying that therapy is necessarily a bad thing. Like, you may need to do that. You may need to flesh out some of these things more thoroughly. But the idea that there's like this institutionalized, and it's a sacrament, like, you go and there's grace to just, here are all the bad things that I've done, and you say your act of contrition, and then you're clean. It's like totally incredible. Yeah, it is. All right. Brian's falling asleep, so we should probably close. All right, closing notes. Where can people find out more about you, your business, future endeavors, etc.?
So the only place we hang out is our website, heal.co. So that is where we do everything.
Okay.
Best writing, online workshops, etc. So there's two things I'd like to highlight.
Sure.
One is, depending on when this episode comes out, February 7th, I'm running a live workshop on emotions. So that's going to be a 2.5 hour workshop.
Okay.
And we will have real people in real time bring things. I'm going to demonstrate a method for clarifying and healing emotions.
Okay.
It's very simple. And then once you see it, you understand how to do it yourself. So if that's a more experiential way to kind of like get into this world. And we run workshops regularly every month. You can look at that on our website and then hover over workshops. That's where the information is there. The other thing is, if you're looking more for something that is not as, I don't know, I guess live experiential, but you're wanting to study this a little bit more, I've written a series of 13 letters that goes into much more detail about what exactly do we mean by organization, what are these 4 behaviors. There's real audio clips from people that practice this and experiencing different breakthroughs, and you can kind of hear like context of like, what does this look like in a real person's life. And all of that is free and on our website. If you go on our website, you'll see a button that says like heal your creativity. If you click that, the landmark letter series is what I'm referring to there. So that's a cool, really, really great, actually free educational resource. And I don't know how I almost forgot this, but also on the website, if you look at the essays page, I highly recommend the essay called The B Spiral. That is the thing that goes into in depth in terms of this B triangle that we were talking about: be organized, be yourself, and be God. And because it's text, we can go into a lot more kind of like scriptural sources for this and other things. So you'll find that very interesting as well.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This is the Doing Virtue podcast, and we'll end with a little cheers. This is doing virtue.
Catholic podcast.
Where virtue is what we do. Cheers.